Welcome in to Check the Mic. Steve Palazzolo, Sam Monson. We're live on YouTube. It is our Thursday morning show. Don't forget, 9 a.m. on Mondays, 10:30 on Thursdays. Sam, we were all optimistic on Monday, gave every team a reason for optimism heading into the season and beyond. But today, the pessimism show. Reasons for concern for all 32 NFL teams.
Yeah, Monday was the reason every team was going to win the Super Bowl, or, most of them. Today is why nobody's going to win it. It's going to go unclaimed this year.
I'm just going to read the notes here because it's the pessimism show. Do not subscribe here. Do not subscribe on YouTube. Do not follow the podcast on Spotify. Don't leave any comments. No thumbs ups. None of it today.
Yeah, like the optimistic view would be we are almost at 46,000 subscribers. So, hit that subscribe button, get us to that next threshold. The pessimistic view would be we are still yet to hit 46,000. We're at 45,900 and something. We haven't gotten there yet. So yeah, don't hit it. Don't get us to that number.
I would say unsubscribe, get us down to 45,000. We don't even deserve it. Get us back. No, we appreciate everybody that's been joining, and it's been a fun couple weeks here, even post draft, with a good following as we get to 2 shows a week here throughout the offseason. Any quick thoughts on the schedule release? Do you have any strong opinions on the schedule release from last night before we get into this?
I really don't. I was sitting there last night going, we should be doing some kind of reaction show to this because everyone's talking about it. It's the NFL schedule. It's huge. It's everywhere. And I'm like, I genuinely can't even summon a thought that I can't care about the schedule. I just can't.
Next year, we go live and we just read all the schedules. Team by team, with all 32 schedules for all 32 teams. We just read them. That's it. All I know is there's a triple header on Christmas. Sorry, kids. Daddy's working.
The only relevant thing is every piece of free time you thought existed based off previous years has subsequently been occupied by the NFL. There are no more pieces of free time between like September and February.
One last thing. I think the NFL should hire me for programming. I tweeted out the other day, every team should have to reveal their draft board as a show. A week after the draft, they have an unveiling of their draft board. That would do the same numbers as the draft. That'd be incredible. Good programming. All right, let's go. We're going to go same order, team by team, reasons for concern. Let's see how quickly we could get through this. Starting in the AFC East, Buffalo Bills, reasons for concern for the Buffalo Bills this year.
Yeah, well, obviously the Bills are a contending team. They've been there or thereabouts for the last few years. They have, however, kept knocking on the door and coming up short. And we've speculated, look, that's a difficult question to answer at the end of every season. Do you need to shift something fundamentally, or do you need to just keep knocking and eventually the door will answer? I generally tend to subscribe to the idea that you just keep getting there and eventually things will break your way. But what if the alternative is true? What if the Bills are actually, there's something fundamentally not there and it just gets found out in January against the best teams and they're going to need to change something significant, which they haven't really done this offseason.
Can't beat the Chiefs. That's it. Just can't beat the Chiefs.
In January.
You beat them in the regular season. Can't beat them in January. That's what it is. I mean, I do wonder if we're going to be pessimistic here. Is there some sort of mental hump to get over here, and how much can you go back to the well? I mean, it's every year it's like, man, we're close. In the last 2 years, they felt better, as I said on the optimism show. They felt like they were more well-rounded and they had more ways to win, and they weren't just relying on Josh Allen. But then you go back and it's like, man, we did a failed QB sneak on 4th and 1 where maybe he got it, maybe he didn't. And it comes down to these 1 or 2 plays. How do you get over that mental hump? Maybe they'll never do it. Maybe they can't.
Maybe.
All right, that's it.
I'll give it. I mean, if you're looking for other potential weaknesses or issues, like the defense was middle of the pack last year. The offense, I think, dramatically outperformed everybody's expectations, even with that kind of question mark at X wide receiver. So I'm not hugely concerned by that, even though in any given game that may become a problem. But the defense was only average last year. And as much as they've attacked that this offseason, they've added players, you're still relying. So, you're relying on a rookie coming in immediately being good at one cornerback spot with Maxwell Hairston. the safety group is not what it used to be when they had a couple of really top tier safeties. They've let those guys leave. They've replaced them, from within with DeMar Hamlin or Cole Bishop or Taylor Rapp has come in. Like, these are not the caliber of the players that used to be there. The defensive front that you've been talking up all offseason because of all the additions, they have a lot of depth, but how many of these guys are like top tier impact, consistent stars week on week? Even a guy like Joey Bosa, he used to be that. Is he that anymore? Probably not. So, I don't know how good that defense is going to be, and that potentially becomes an issue.
Yeah, defense has been an issue down the stretch for injuries in 23 last year, just performance-wise. I think they got a little lucky against the Ravens with the turnovers. They forced them, but that would be the one last thing I might add here. The turnover luck last year was very much in Buffalo's favor. That is a tough thing to sustain, right? Everybody preaches turnovers. Everybody preaches turn it over on defense. Don't turn it over on offense. Everybody wants to do that, but it's really tough to sustain that year over year if that reverts. Not good for the Bills on the pessimism show here. Miami Dolphins up next. Reasons for concern or pessimism for the Miami Dolphins.
The whole kind of thing we've been talking about all offseason, like, what are they doing? This was a team that kind of grabbed a bunch of superstars in the last couple of years, made big splashes for guys like Tyreek Hill, Jalen Ramsey. And you can't say they didn't work. Those guys had big impacts on this team. But overall, the approach, like the direction that the team was going in, they pulled in a good direction. They moved things forward, and then they just hit a level. And, Tua getting hurt, the concussion deal that he dealt with, et cetera, didn't help. But this team effectively reached a ceiling and didn't progress beyond that. And it's tough to look at their offseason this year and be like, yeah, this moves them from where they were into the contender bracket and into the top echelon of teams. Couple of years ago, we were looking at this team heading into the season, and they were like in one of those, we're like the whole AFC looks like a murderer's row of elite contending teams, and Miami could be one of them. I don't think anyone's saying that anymore. So the concern is simply, has the window already closed if indeed it was ever open?
Yeah, for Miami, I would position it not so much as what are they doing, but they're in this spot where after going for it before the 2023 season, after going for it, they're now caught in, okay, now Tua is a $50 million contract, and the multiple years of not adding a ton of youth to the roster are starting to catch up. They're in transition. And so now you're talking about, I think, a Dolphins team that's transitioning a little bit here from go for it to build from within. And even when they went for it, they were still lacking. They were still, had the inability to compete with the Bills and the Chiefs and the Ravens and the best teams in the AFC. So I think that would be the concern here, is they don't look better right now. They don't look better than they were, say, a year or two ago. But they're, maybe moving in that direction and attacking the trenches and attacking some weaknesses here. But I think it might take some time. So that's how I would position this for the Dolphins. How much longer does Tyreek Hill actually have? So much of what made them potentially special was the Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle combination, Tua getting them the ball, Mike McDaniel. Has that leveled off? And with Tyreek getting old, we see Jalen Ramsey on the trading block. So they're aging and transitioning right now as the Tua cap hit starts to really, set in here for the Dolphins.
I mean, they're going into a season as well where right now, and look, we're not there yet. There's still moves that can be made. There will be veterans available, et cetera. But they have massive weaknesses on this team right now. Like cornerback could be a combination of Storm Duck, Cam Smith, Kader Kohu. Like this is a bad cornerback room right now. If the Jalen Ramsey thing can't get worked out, if they end up having to, part ways with him, and even with him, it's not a strength. So whether you subscribe to filling your needs in free agency, doing it in the draft, like if you end up doing neither and you come out of both of those offseason opportunities with massive weaknesses, that's the problem.
Let's move on to the New England Patriots. Reasons for concern. I mean, it was easy to pull out the optimism, right? They added a ton of pieces on offense, a ton of pieces on defense, but what could go wrong here for New England heading into the season?
effectively repeating last season, right? Like last year, they at the top of the draft, they had trade offers on the table. They decided, no, we love Drake May. We're going to take the QB and figure out how to put something around him later on. And then they circle back and they double dipped on the offensive line. They double dipped at receiver in the draft. And from a process standpoint, I think that was really good. Like we like that. Look, they've doubled the chances that these guys are going to make an impact. And, a lot of people like Jalen Polk and a lot of people like Javon Baker. And, we thought this could be a great move for them. And all of those guys were bad year one. Like all the draft picks that they threw at this, none of them were able to do anything effectively. And in fact, a guy like Jalen Polk had a historically terrible rookie wide receiver season. So it wasn't just that they missed or that they didn't get a really plus player, is that the darts they threw seemed to completely miss. They didn't just miss the target, they missed the dartboard. So this offseason, we're going to say the same thing. They went and spent the money in free agency on defense and different areas. And you're like, well, okay, let's see what they do in the draft. Again, it looks good on paper, right? They bring in Will Campbell, most people's tackle number one consensus-wise. They bring in a guy like Kyle Williams, who a ton of people, smart people, really loved. Mike Renner was really high on him. Chris Sims had him as like wide receiver 2, somewhere crazy high, somewhere in his, way higher than everybody else. So crazy. I should have learned. Don't say it crazy when it comes to Chris Sims.
Aggressively high.
He already proved us wrong before.
Yeah.
Anyway, a lot of people loved Kyle Williams, and we think it's a great fit. But what if he's just this year's Jalen Polk, right? What if Will Campbell's arm length and wingspan means he is, in fact, a guard and he can't play tackle at this level? Like, it looks great right now, but there's a chance that, 6 months from now, we're looking at this and going, they've done it again. They've for the second draft in a row, they've thrown resources at these positions, and neither one of them has worked out yet.
Yeah, for New England, I would position it as what I've said previously a couple times. It might not all kick in this year. If they are going to rely on Jared Wilson as the starting center or even just Garrett Bradbury, did they really upgrade at center? Third round, I love Jared Wilson, but might take some time there. Will Campbell, I will say this, the more I watch Will Campbell, I was watching a little Gregory Rousseau the other day for the Bills. If I'm the Bills, I'm putting Rousseau over Campbell. Let's test that arm length. Let's see with Rousseau and his massive wingspan. So there are potential weaknesses to Will Campbell's game, and even if he turns out to be a good player, you might not feel the offensive line improvement in year one, and that could hinder the whole thing, even if they did make good moves on paper. So that's how I would position this, is as optimistic as you want to be in New England, and they should be for the first time in a few years now. New coach, new players on offense, new players on defense. Pretty big overhaul here. There should be optimism. It might not all kick in year one, right? It might not kick in at all, right? So, right. But in year one in particular, even though I think the moves are good long term, you might not feel it right now, and it might be another 6-win season for New England, and you're going to start questioning yourself, even if the trajectory is moving in the right direction.
I mean, that's the thing. Between the rookies and, Stephon Diggs at his age coming off a serious knee injury, they could still be working with a bottom 5 offensive line, a bottom 5 receiving core around your young quarterback who showed, amazing play in a bad situation, but at some point is going to need some help.
Let's go to the New York Jets. Reasons for concern or pessimism for the Jets. The optimism, by the way, is Aaron Rodgers is out. So yeah. What are the reasons for concern?
Yeah, well, the reason for concern is you're starting a quarterback who 2 separate teams have given up on in the last 12 months, effectively. Like Justin Fields, talented quarterback, guy that went in the top half of the first round that a lot of people were talking about as, a special prospect, has special athleticism, but has yet to become really a viable passing weapon at this level. And as I said, 2 separate teams now have decided to go in a different direction, one of which, the Steelers, they still don't have a quarterback. So if they really bought into Justin Fields, number one, they probably wouldn't have benched him for Russell Wilson when he got healthy. They would have let him keep the job at the point that they had that decision to make. And number two, they would have made sure they kept him. They wouldn't have let the Jets outbid them in free agency for Fields. So it's fine as a stopgap, I think, but it's not, I don't think, a particularly plus plan unless you're able to unlock that leap forward in Justin Fields, which I do think is theoretically there, but has yet to materialize.
Yeah, so I would agree. You start with, we don't really have a long-term option at quarterback. Maybe Fields is the next, rejuvenated quarterback around the NFL, former first rounder that figures it out and has success. That's possible. I would also say now you're much like the Dolphins. You're kind of feeling the effects of the go for it moves. You're feeling the effects of investing in an older Tyron Smith, an older Morgan Moses, all of Aaron Rodgers' friends at receiver. So now you're feeling the effects of we're getting younger on the offensive line, which is fine. I like the line. I think that's actually more positive than negative. Who's your wide receiver 2 next to Garrett Wilson? I think that's a big question mark. The defensive line has been depleted. I mean, it's taken a hit as far as depth over the last couple of years. You have some players coming back from injury, but defensive tackle is a big question next to Quinnen Williams. The secondary was a big question to the point where they paid, Brandon Stevens probably a little bit too much to potentially be the starting corner opposite Sauce Gardner. So yeah, I think that'd be my concern, is that you're also in a bit of a transition period here. And when you do that, it's great. I mean, it feels good to get younger and to reset the roster a little bit, but also could not. I mean, it's a bunch of mystery boxes, right? So it's a youth movement as they turn things over here for the Jets. So I just think the roster, which did look pretty good on paper the last 2 years, I don't hate a lot of the moves Joe Douglas made. It just coincided with Rodgers probably got a tick too old, was coming off the Achilles, and the pieces didn't fit, but they a lot of them made sense on paper. Now you're resetting things in New York.
Well, the dynamic has changed, right? Like, this team had an amazing defense under Robert Saleh, and they were like, this, you find a quarterback, this team could be a contender pretty quickly. And that's why the Aaron Rodgers thing made sense, in addition to the fact that the alternative was probably Derek Carr, which, that's not great either. It made sense to gamble on Rodgers because it looked like this team was like a Rodgers away from being pretty good. All of a sudden, you get rid of Robert Saleh, you get rid of, his deputy after he becomes sort of interim head coach. Now the defense looks pretty weak. There's a lot of question marks on that defense. Cornerback opposite Sauce Gardner, who suffered the first sort of significant downturn of his NFL career. Safety's a weakness. The defensive line isn't as strong as it used to be. So suddenly, the strength of this team isn't anymore, and you still have the question at quarterback, and you haven't got the secondary weapon, next to Garrett Wilson. All of these things that were weaknesses before are still weaknesses, and the strength has disappeared.
All right, let's move on to the NFC East here, starting with the Dallas Cowboys. Reasons for concern for the Cowboys. I mean, for me, it has to start with, the last 2 off seasons haven't felt great for Dallas as far as keeping up in free agency. The George Pickens move, again, feels wise. It's like, all right, that's an impact player that you're bringing in there, but he comes with the concerns that, Pittsburgh was ready to get rid of him. So where would you go here with Dallas?
Yeah, I mean, there's several, I guess. Existentially, you've got this seems to be one of the worst run teams process-wise. A lot of other teams, you can see what they're doing. You can construct a very good argument for doing it that way, even if it's not necessarily the way you would do it optimally. For Dallas, it's difficult to make the case that what they're doing is not wrong, right? And that's the difference, I think, for them versus a lot of other teams. That approach to, not using free agency to tick off needs, heading into the first round, knowing we need to draft a player that fits a specific need. This is just not, this isn't debatable. This is suboptimal, definitely. Basically, inarguably, just the wrong approach in today's NFL. And it's leading them into forcing players that probably don't belong at the spots they're drafting them consistently. Tyler Guyton was a reach where they drafted him a year ago. They needed him to be good right away. He wasn't. Now they need him to be good in year 2. And if he isn't, it's a problem again. The same thing is going to be true with Tyler Booker, who's coming in to replace a Hall of Fame right guard in Zach Martin, overdrafted at 12 overall. And he needs to be good immediately. Otherwise, that line's going to be creaking. So I think existentially, you've got this team looks to be badly run. Secondly, you've got whatever about Buffalo, and do they have a mental block? Dallas does have a mental block in the postseason. I think that's fairly incontrovertible at this point. They choke once they get to those postseason games now. And choke is thrown around liberally these days. And I think generally it's not really a massive thing. It's used way more often than it's applicable. But Dallas have been choking in the postseason recently, and that pressure isn't getting any less year on year on year. If they get there again and they play those games, they know they're battling 20 plus years of history. So those two things are working against them. Then you got like the roster point of view. The offensive line would be the first thing I would point to and say that's got, multiple potentially concerning spots right now. And Dak Prescott has already shown in his career, he plays a lot better with a good offensive line in front of him than one that isn't great.
I would start there. Yeah, Dak's played with a very good offensive line for the majority of his career, and Dallas has done a great job of drafting and developing linemen. My concern is I think they drafted you mentioned Guyton, a production outlier in Guyton last year in the first round. I would say a workout outlier this year in Tyler Booker. So those are two of the more questionable moves. I thought Cooper Beebe was not a production outlier. He was outstanding production-wise. Looks like a steal where they got him last year in the third round as a starting center. So that's my concern is they almost like the two players that they invested in the most on the O-line the last couple of years have some question marks. The George Pickens dynamic, we already see Micah Parsons and DeMarcus Lawrence. We already see some infighting or outfighting, you could say, from former Cowboys. How does Pickens add to that dynamic? And then I would say high level, Sam, when we were having this show maybe 2 years ago, we would have said, look, Dallas is good at everything. They've got a good offense, a good defense. Everything looks great. They just can't win in the playoffs. I don't know how you solve that. I don't know how you solve that from a personnel standpoint or a mental block standpoint. All of that's still true, but the roster's worse over the last couple of years, right? So all of it's still true, but the roster is turning over on the offensive line, questions at receiver that hopefully Pickens answers, some turnover on the defensive line where they're going to rely on some more youth with DeMarcus Lawrence out. So that would be my high-level concern is they still have the playoff question, but we could at least say, hey, man, they're a 12-win team in the regular season. They're going to at least get on the green to try to make a putt. We don't even know if that's the case anymore with the rest of the division all ascending right now.
Yeah, I mean, their roster may be getting worse year on year, and all of a sudden there are more teams threatening them than was the case before. Previously, it was like, can they go toe-to-toe with the Eagles? Well, now, Washington just went on a run with a rookie quarterback that looks spectacular and looks like he has the potential to be, better than Dak Prescott. The Giants had a great offseason, and maybe they're a year away from making noise, but they're moving in the right direction as well. So suddenly just their division looks a hell of a lot tougher than it's been for most of the time that Dallas was good.
Let's talk Giants right now. Reasons for concern, because I think we were on the optimistic side here. You come out of the draft with some defensive line help, certainly with Abdul Carter, might have one of the best defensive lines in the NFL now. You got your quarterback in round one, but are the Giants good enough? Are they still the fourth best team in the NFC East? That's where I would start as far as a reason for concern, even if you should be more optimistic for the Giants right now.
Well, I mean, I would start with the quarterback and the offensive line that the quarterback will be behind, right? So, number one, you've got the question of what will Jackson Dart be? Some people loved him. Some people did not like him. Jackson Dart may not be the guy. So that's first question. Number two, is he going to start? How long is he going to be on the bench for? Because the guys in front of him are Russell Wilson, who's clearly got, a fairly defined ceiling to his game at this point. Jameis Winston, who'll give you just the most spectacular, entertaining roller coaster in the NFL, but the baseline is not particularly high. Or Cutlets, who's still on the roster, and let's see how long he lasts. So they might not have a quarterback still, would be my first point. And the offensive line in front of that guy, whoever it is still pretty weak. I mean, particularly the interior looks bad right now. Andrew Thomas is a really good left tackle. Jermaine Illuminor at right tackle, I think, is capable. But like John Runyon, John Michael Schmitz, and Evan Neal, that might be three below average to bad interior players, which forms the core of your offensive line right now. So whether it's Russell Wilson, the madness of Jameis, or a rookie Jackson Dart, all three of those guys might be struggling behind a weak offensive line.
I would add to this. I think the Giants, I've said this before, they may have laid a really good foundation potentially for the next GM and or head coach. And that could be a potential issue. I think Joe Shane has done a pretty good job over the last couple of years. I don't know how Jackson Dart ends up, but that's maybe an overdraft in the first round. I don't know what he ends up being, but I like the process of getting him and Abdul Carter in the first round. But we could be at a point next year. We might not feel it this year, right? Like Russell Wilson, right. They still have on paper a bottom 5 to 10 quarterback situation, bottom 5 quarterback situation, right? I mean, what's Russ going to do at this point? And if it's not Russ, we're talking rookie Jackson Dart with that O-line that you're talking about. So there's potential for another 4, 5, 6 win season for the Giants, and then turnover in the front office and the coaching staff. And even though the players might be good, you gotta reset, right? And then you're turning things over again. So that's part of my concern, I think, with the Giants. Even though I think things are moving in the right direction, they might not feel it for year one.
Yeah, I mean, I think the process to get Jackson Dart was good, and I don't have any problem with what they gave up. But the question is, number one, when does he play? You know, he felt to me like a guy that could use the time on the bench. Can they give him that time? You know, will Russell Wilson play at a level that allows them to keep Jackson Dart learning, give him a redshirt year effectively, which is what I would do with him. I think Russell Wilson and Jameis gives you the ability to do that, but that means you're probably going to be bad this year. Like Russell Wilson and Jameis as a combination at quarterback behind that offensive line with only really Malik Neighbors as a clear, plus receiver. I don't really see how that football team or that offense wins enough games to keep everybody comfortable. Now, look, if you've got buy-in from ownership and you say, hey, look, this is the plan. This kid's the future, but he's not going to come in year one. Understand we're probably not going to be great year one. If Mara is okay with that and you're able to get everyone to buy in, then cool. But like, that's the concern, right? Is that this whole thing just kind of runs aground before they get a chance to be the future.
Let's go Philadelphia Eagles, defending Super Bowl champions. Reasons for concern here for the Eagles.
Man, this is the first difficult one.
I mean, you could definitely look on paper and say, well, they lost Josh Sweat and Milton Williams. You could make the case this is the most depleted. I'm putting this in air quotes, man. Depleted their defensive line has been in a decade. Is that extreme? I mean, listen, they have had a top 5 defensive line from a PFF pass rush grade perspective for 10 years now. I mean, we're talking 2015. And they made a smooth transition from Brandon Graham and Fletcher Cox and everybody that they used to have to the youth movement. But part of that youth movement was Josh Sweat and Milton Williams. And even though I know Jalix Hunt is there and Moro Ajomo, I know that there are guys there, but is this the weakest it's been because the standard has been so high? So is this the weakest defensive line that they've had in years, which is still probably a top 5 unit?
I mean, maybe. I still think that's a strength of the team. I guess,
you said it was difficult.
Get out clause for all these things is always injuries. Like they are, when they're where they're good, they're pretty thin at a couple of spots. Like if AJ Brown goes down for any chunk of the season, that suddenly becomes a real weakness of a receiving core. Devontae Smith's good, but can he carry the whole group by himself? I would debate that. Like the guys behind him are, Jahan Dotson and Johnny Wilson and Terrace Marshall. And, that suddenly becomes a weakness of a receiving core if either one of those top 2 guys, I think, goes down. Similarly, I think you can look at the offensive line. It's really, really good when the starting 5 are out there. But if one guy gets hurt, suddenly that becomes concern. Like if either the tackles get hurt, I would be pretty concerned. Even if one of the interior guys goes down, in addition to the right guard spot being a bit of a question mark, that I think could unravel a bit quickly. Or if Jalen Hurts starts playing badly for a stretch, that would be a worry. But the Eagles are in a good situation. You're nitpicking, I think, to find any significant reason for concern. The other one would be, we saw what happened to them a couple of years ago when they lost both coordinators in one offseason. They only lost one of them this time, but they did lose them.
Yeah, I was going to mention Kellen Moore. The fact that Kellen Moore and Vic Fangio came in, righted the ship, and the biggest. Yeah, they went to the Super Bowl in 22, win the Super Bowl in 24, but that 23 season, remember, last year at this time, we were like, man, that was one of the worst implosions we've ever seen. And you tied it a lot to maybe offensive, defensive coordinator, whatever was happening in the locker room. They solved that problem pretty quickly last year. I mean, we were still asking, is this still lingering? Is it still lingering? By about week 5, I think we had some answers that, all right, this is a different Eagles team that's playing up to their talent. But that's a fair question on offense. Kellen Moore, new head coach of the Saints, did a nice job of playing to their talent, getting the most out of Saquon Barkley, of course, getting that career year, playing into the offensive line, and just adjusting to everything that they had. So, yeah, I think that would be a question. I don't think and here's my final take on the defensive line though. As far as an edge rush group goes, if they are going to play Jahad Campbell on the edge, and that's why what they drafted him to do, and it's Nolan Smith and Jalix Hunt had a beautiful play down the stretch for a small school guy, but they missed on Bryce Huff, at least in year one. They're bringing in guys like Josh Uche, Azeez Ojulari. Uche just didn't do much with Kansas City. The fact that they feel like they're stitching it together on the edge after years of having, being, 4 deep at edge rusher and 4 deep at defensive tackle. This is what I'm saying. It feels like it's a step back from where they were. And I think they'll get back to it over the next couple of years with drafting and developing. But it feels like a step back from where they were with as effective as Milton Williams and Josh Sweat were these last couple of years. That has to get worse, I think, this year relative to where they've been. So that'd be where I'm at for the Eagles. I'm with you. I mean, go check out the Optimism show. It's very positive for the Eagles. So yeah, we're looking for some stretches here for reasons for concern.
Yeah.
Let's go Commanders. And here's what I would say for Washington. Did they overachieve last year? Like, did they just do too well in year one? There's definitely reasons for great optimism in Washington, but it also, when you go unit by unit, as far as breaking down this roster, are they actually as good as teams like the Eagles and the Lions? I know they beat the Lions in the playoffs. I hear you, but are they actually that good and primed, for regression this year, despite Jaden Daniels looking like a future star?
Yeah. So it's a bit like the Giants season from a couple of years ago, where they surprised everybody, made the playoffs. And then I think what really did them in was they won a playoff game by beating Minnesota when Dexter Lawrence just decided to individually destroy the Minnesota Vikings offensive line. And that win in particular was what kind of got everybody misaligned, I think, on what the Giants were going forward. And you can argue, look, there's some parallels there with what Washington did. They went on this run, they made the playoffs, but then they went on a run within the playoffs and, got to a championship game and, before they end up coming up short against the Eagles. But the run, I think, is potentially what would cause that same potential issue. But I think they've done a good job at adding talent to this team, assuming the concern would be that, yeah, they're just not as good as they looked when they went on that kind of run. That was inherently not fluky, but not necessarily a long-term sustainable, repeatable trick, right? Like they had a ton of turnovers against Detroit. That's not the kind of thing that happens every game.
The other thing too, like the history of what I mentioned as far as turnovers go with the Bills, it is very difficult to sustain turnover luck. It's difficult to sustain fourth down success, right? So as NFL analysts here, Sam, we're like, wow, the Commanders had an incredibly high conversion rate on fourth down. And we come out and we say, well, Jaden Daniels is a huge part of that, which is absolutely true. His run pass ability and the options that you have with Jaden Daniels give you many more, just you to be more effective on fourth down. However, the 2019 Ravens always come to mind. They were unbelievable on fourth down. They run into the playoffs. They go 0 for 2 right off the bat against Tennessee and get upset because we know that those things can be fluky. So if the Commanders just revert back a little bit in just fourth down conversions, you're talking about a potential regression. I know that's oversimplifying, but those are the types of numbers that were in their favor that helped them win playoff games against the Bucs, that helps them with the turnovers, as you mentioned, in the Lions game. Those are going to be tough to sustain for a team that, again, roster-wise, if you were ranking all the top 4 teams, the Chiefs, Bills, and the Eagles last year, the Commanders are by far the 4th best roster from last year's final 4 teams. So even though they're doing a lot of good things, you could see them. They're primed to maybe be the look better on paper team this year that does actually regress from an actual performance standpoint.
There's still a lot of holes on this roster. Like the defense, almost top to bottom, does not look great, and maybe a potential issue. The other thing is, what if the trades that they made this offseason just don't work out? I mean, Deebo Samuel has been banged up. He's been this hybrid player, running back, wide receiver. He hasn't looked like the sort of special impact player he was for a while now. What if he's just not that guy anymore and he doesn't make the kind of impact you expect him to? What if Laramie Tunsil as good as he is as a pass blocker, like what if he is actually more of a headache than he's worth? And the Texans people who are all like, thank God we got rid of him. What if they're right? Like, what if it looks great on paper, but there's a reason that one of the worst offensive lines in the NFL was willing to trade away by far their best player on the line, and actually it causes more problems than it solves for Washington. So, yeah, for a team that I think generally is pointed in the right direction and obviously has the most important part in place in Jaden Daniels, there's definitely concerns on this team.
Let's go AFC North. Baltimore Ravens up next. Almost choked. We got it.
Almost.
Baltimore Ravens up first, Sam. What are your reasons for concern?
Kind of similar, I guess, to Buffalo's. Like, are they just postseason chokers? You know, we finally got a good playoff run from Lamar Jackson. He throws the ball to Mark Andrews, and one of the best tight ends in the NFL just drops it. What if this is just a Baltimore problem? Is they're a really good football team that chokes once it gets important in the playoffs?
It's a real question here, because how did we describe Kansas City over the last couple of years? They're like calibrated to win by 3, always going to make one play more than the other team. And for every time that the Ravens had a heartbreaker, last year in the AFC Championship, or 2 years ago in the AFC Championship, last year in the divisional round, every time the Bills had a heartbreaker, you could go back and point to, think about all the mistakes the Ravens have made in both of the playoff games last year. Red zone turnovers against the Chiefs. They only lost by 7 to the Chiefs and couldn't put it all together offensively. The other thing I would say, Lamar's coming off his best season statistically and probably performance-wise, even though he didn't win MVP, and you still didn't get to the AFC Championship, right? You had a lot go right, and they have looked like the best regular season powerhouse. I think if you combine the last 2 seasons, that's been Baltimore, the best regular season team. And then they get into the playoffs and, don't necessarily play up to their standards. Last year it was turnovers. The year before it was just overall offensive performance and turnovers. So until it's rectified, I'd say that's a reason for concern that they haven't had they've played dominant regular season games against good teams and just haven't had that stretch or that run in the playoffs.
Yeah, they have. I mean, I think it's, again, choking is a term thrown around too liberally, but they're getting to that Dallas territory where I think it's a fair question. Mark Andrews doesn't drop that ball. Like, it's not a perfect throw. It's not the easiest catch in the world. It is one that you would put a large amount of money on Mark Andrews coming down with, though. That guy is a fantastic tight end, and he probably never makes a mistake of that magnitude again for the rest of his career. Similarly, Lamar Jackson has played some of his worst football in the playoffs. Now, it didn't happen this time. He actually played well, but somebody else made the mistake. Until they stop making these errors, small though they may be, they're going to be seen as this team that chokes in the playoffs.
Anything else just from a roster construction standpoint? Because we usually are complimenting the Ravens. I think they're in really good shape. They do a nice job of just depth-wise. Their starting 22 is always among the league's best, I would say. Plus, Lamar helps elevate that group. They just re-signed Derrick Henry or extended him to a record deal. So there's not much to complain about, I don't think, from a team-building perspective. It really is, they haven't shown that they can win the big one, so to speak, and put it all together on a playoff run.
Yeah, they've got a couple of areas where there's some potential weakness. The guards were something we flagged heading into the offseason. They didn't really do anything to upgrade those guys. Voorhees on the left side, Faalele on the right side. That's not necessarily a strength for them. It is, however, massively mitigated by Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry in the backfield. So, I don't know how big a deal it will be. They've lost a safety already, but they've got Malachi Starks, their first-round pick, to come in and be the starter from day one again. I think that should be fine. Cornerback with Nate Wiggins is good. Chidobe Awuzie they bring in, and for a kind of short-term solution, that should be fine. So I think they're generally a good roster, pretty much top to bottom. There's some areas that aren't necessarily massive strengths, but I don't think there's glaring weaknesses. They're navigating a post-Justin Tucker world for the first time in a long time. They released him this offseason. Obviously, he's dealing with his own, I don't know what the number got up to, but a load of accusations of, sexual impropriety, I guess is the way of terming that. The best kicker, effectively, maybe of all time, but certainly for like the last decade, had already kind of fallen off last season and is now out of there. What does their kicking situation look like is a question we haven't had to ask for Baltimore for however long Justin Tucker's career has been.
All right, let's go to our hometown Cincinnati Bengals. Reasons for concern for the Bengals. They the positive side was, hey, it's Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase and T. Higgins together for the future. They took care of that, but too many eggs in just a couple baskets, Sam. I think that's a fair question as far as reasons for concern here for the Bengals.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not massively. My biggest concern right now is the offseason, I think, was navigated successfully because everyone is like, the Bengals are too cheap. They'll never give the money to T. Higgins and Jamar Chase and Joe Burrow all at the same time. Like, they'll just not do it, right? And they did it. They actually they got the money together. They gave them the cash. They got the deals done. They were good money deals as well. Like, they didn't cheap out on the deals. They paid the money where the money needs to get paid. And you're like, well, the Bengals, they've turned a corner. Look, they've built a practice, area that's not to be termed a bubble. They've invested in the stadium. They're spending money. It's a different world. And now we get to, May, and they're back to cheaping out, right? They're not going to give Trey Hendrickson the deal that he wants. And they're not guaranteeing, the safety of players at mini camp. So their top 2 draft picks are holding out. They're not playing, right? They're not out there on the field. Like, these are routine things that NFL teams do. And the Bengals have decided to draw a line in the sand and go, not for us. So the offense is great. It's in situ. They nailed it. They kept those guys together. But the defense last year, like, the only good player on it was Trey Hendrickson. And now you've ostracized him and he's refusing to play until you give him a new contract. Your solution to that, or your insurance policy against that, was, really swinging the bat for one of the most kind of polarizing players in the entire draft. And Shamar Stewart, big time potential, big time risk as well. He's not even out there on the field in rookie mini camps because you won't guarantee, his money effectively before he signs his contract. So they might not have a defensive lineman that can do anything at the moment.
Throw in the guard questions, and it's a tricky one because I think Joe Burrow, I'll keep coming back to, I think Joe Burrow is underrated, depending on who you're talking to. I think we rate him pretty highly on this show, but the fact that people maybe don't put Burrow into this top-tier conversation consistently, he's had great playmakers, yes. He's had below-average offensive lines for the majority of his career. I don't think there's been many quarterbacks that have overcome that. So I'm going to say this as a weakness, completely acknowledging that the offense last year had a similar weakness and was outstanding. But the guards are a weakness. The interior of the offensive line on the decline. I thought they did a nice job building it up with free agents a couple of years ago. The way they handled it, those guys started to decline. So now you're still depending on Cordell Volson, Cody Ford, maybe one or two of the rookies steps in and upgrades that as Jalen Rivers or Dylan Fairchild. But it still looks like a below-average offensive line, which in any given game can absolutely, hurt the offense. As great as Burrow, Chase, and Higgins are, it's fragile with the offensive line in that shape. And I would say because of the questions that you just brought up, we don't know what's going to happen with Trey Hendrickson. Shamar Stewart is already an upside projection type of player. The defensive line could be a weakness again. So when we talk about from a team building perspective, you want to be strong in the trenches. The Bengals are really strong on the perimeter, maybe on the defensive side as well, with Dax Hill coming back. Might be really good on the perimeter, receiver and corner, but weak on both lines once again with so many question marks. So I think that's all fair. And then the defense was awful last year. We've generally taken the tact that, hey, it should creep back to an average just from laws of probability and new coordinator and some injuries coming back or whatever. Could also just be bad again. And you've got the same, like, hey, we're going to be in shootouts next year and, giving up 25-30 a game and barely over 500 again.
Yeah, I mean, the pessimistic look on that defense is it's basically the same group and actually worse than it was a year ago, where it was one of the worst defenses in the NFL. Like, those young guys you pointed to a corner, yeah, sure, the arrow was pointed up and they have potential and they were highly touted prospects, but what if they're just not good NFL players, which the majority of their career would suggest so far, and actually relying on them to be your starters is a problem, not a strength. Again, Trey Hendrickson, your one high-end NFL player, defensive player. I mean, that's now. they're getting into it publicly. In the ownership is like, well, you should just be happy with the amount of money we're giving him. Frankly, right? Where's the gratitude? We're offering him millions of dollars, and then Trey Henderson shows up because they started finding him because they're at this impasse, right? They're finding him because he didn't show up to mandatory mini camps, even though they're at this contract impasse. I mean, this is not how you work together to try and get one of your best players under contract. This is becoming a problem.
All right, let's go Cleveland Browns here. Reasons for pessimism or concern for the Browns. I mean, pretty clearly, even though they're getting out from the Deshaun Watson mess, they're still in it. And so I think that's a starting point. We don't know who the quarterback is going forward, and the roster has taken quite a hit over the last couple of years.
Yeah, I mean, do you need to go further than the quarterback room, right? Like, no. Look at what it is. Ask yourself which one of those guys could possibly play above average football this year. And, I mean, you still have the Deshaun Watson contract. He's, for all intents and purposes, not a relevant football player on this team, other than the fact that he provides a contractual handicap to the roster. Joe Flacco is older than he was when he last played average to below average football. Kenny Pickett has already bummed his way out of one team, has been traded away as the backup of another team. And then you have the 2 draft picks, Dylan Gabriel, a mid-round draft pick, and Shedeur Sanders, one of the most epic slides in all of draft history, and just a roll the dice, a shot to nothing as a 5th round pick. One of those guys is going to be the starting quarterback for this team. And it's hard to imagine any of them playing, really high level football.
Yeah. I mean, the optimistic view that I've taken on the Browns is the process of finding the next guy is a positive one, even though if they stumbled into the Shedeur 5th rounder. The negative is that you still don't find a guy, right? You're still in mystery box world here when it comes to the quarterback situation. The other thing I'll throw out there, like the offensive line, every starting offensive lineman except DeJuan Jones is in the last year of their contract. To me, that's an example of where the roster has gone. Because we used to cite, man, this foundation on the line is outstanding, and they've got some depth on the defensive line. As in 2023, the depth is just taking a hit. And then when you have Nick Chubb moving on, and you spend 2 picks on running backs, out of that haul, I think they're playing a little whack-a-mole across the roster because of the lack of first-round picks and money that they've had to play with over the last couple of years. So, look, optimism show, I said, hey, moving in the right direction. Process-wise, it's good, but roster's gotten worse, and because of the miss on Watson, you're over here, trying to figure out if one of 3 quarterbacks is the future here for Cleveland, and they still might be drafting a guy in the first round next year again. So, yeah, that's a reason for concern is you don't know who the quarterback is, and the roster's gotten worse.
Actually, the biggest concern is that it goes so badly this year that people get fired, because I think overall, Kevin Stefanski, coach of the year, Andrew Berry, you keep talking about him as like amazing GM with the worst decision in NFL history under his belt. Those things I think are probably all true. So you have a good person at the 2 most important kind of front office positions effectively in the organization. And they've set themselves up well in terms of the process is good. They've got 2 young quarterbacks. They've got to roll the dice. They should buy you time to get to next year. And next year you have 2 first-round draft picks. You can go get the real quarterback that can be the future. But what if things go so badly this year with no viable quarterback that somebody gets fired and now you downgrade at one of those most important positions in the front office? Like, you end up winning 2 games, you get the number 1 overall pick, or the number 2 pick or whatever. You're perfectly positioned to go get next year's quarterback. But because you won 2 games in embarrassing fashion, ownership just goes, you know what, enough of this. We're going in a different direction. And you boot out the 2 people that set you up to go get the next quarterback and actually put the thing in the correct position.
All right, let's go Pittsburgh Steelers now. The Steelers, reasons for concern. Just traded George Pickens. We're waiting on Aaron Rodgers. Is it I don't know which one's a concern. Aaron Rodgers shows up or he doesn't show up, but they're both kind of in the mix here as a reason for concern.
Well, the reason for concern is it's May 15th and they are waiting on Aaron Rodgers. That is the concern, is that whether or not he signs, this the fact that is the dynamic currently, that's already the concern. right now your quarterback depth chart is Mason Rudolph, Will Howard, and Skylar Thompson. And if it isn't that, it's bringing in geriatric Aaron Rodgers, who's snapped his Achilles after 4 snaps and then came back and couldn't propel the Jets anywhere useful last season, and is a giant, media circus and distraction and all those kinds of things. There's no good outcome to this.
Yeah, Rodgers, the last year, he was okay in 2022. He was okay last year. So the last year he had, let's say, impact play was 2021 when he won the MVP. So we're a few years removed, and most players don't get better in their 40s. Most don't. So that's a concern. And yeah, just the fact that we're playing this game, the fact that he could, just retire at any given point is a concern. And then just generally, I'd say the Steelers as a whole still fight. Throw this similar to the Cowboys or what we were kind of joking about with the Bills and the Ravens. How are they getting over the hump? Like what are they doing? What have they done to say now we're competing with the Ravens and the Bills and the Chiefs and the best teams in the AFC? Is there anything? There aren't many outcomes available for the Steelers other than Rodgers plays like an MVP candidate that he used to be. So I think you're running out of options for what's the thing that puts the Steelers over the hump besides like the fountain of youth for Aaron Rodgers. And that's with me saying, I think much like we talked about Andrew Berry, I think Omar Khan's done a pretty decent job of adding talent to that defense, adding talent on offense for the most part, at least moving in the right direction. But the quarterback situation is still a big question. The other part I would say specifically is wide receiver 2. Rodgers there or not, what are they doing at receiver 2 now that they've traded for DK Metcalf, but then traded George Pickens? So what is the complementary piece for DK Metcalf, who's always had a complementary piece? He's always had a pretty much an equivalent type of player in Tyler Lockett. Lockett was outstanding in his prime, different style player, but at least as good as DK. And then last year, Jackson Smith-Njigba's breakout season next to DK Metcalf. So you don't have that in Pittsburgh. So are you relying too much on DK as wide receiver 1? So I think there's some some specific roster stuff, but also just the Rodgers dynamic is a reason for concern.
Yeah, look, their defense may be amazing, but the offense, regardless of who the quarterback is, has some problems attached to it. They might have a bad left tackle in need of replacement. They might not have a number 2 wide receiver. Their number 1 wide receiver is not of the sort of top echelon of number 1 wide receivers who can do everything. This is a team where the situation that whatever quarterback they're dealing with is going to get put into, I don't think is amazing. So that itself might be a concern, on top of the fact that we're talking about Aaron Rodgers, who's not even on the team midway through May.
All right, let's go NFC North concerns here. We got to start with the Detroit Lions. I hate doing this to our friends, the Lions fans. Reasons for concern for the Lions here.
It's got to be the coaching, not the Dan Campbell thing. But they suffered the same fate that the Philadelphia Eagles did a couple of years ago. They lost both coordinators in one offseason, one of whom has been the prize, of the coaching carousel for the last couple of years, Ben Johnson. And for multiple years now, they were able to convince him to come back. We still have work to be done. Let's complete the job. This offseason was eventually it. The Bears convinced him to go away. So he's gone, and he's gone to a division rival. That's extra salt in the wound. But that's the real concern, right? Can you withstand that kind of loss? It didn't go well when it happened to the Eagles. That doesn't necessarily mean that's, the way it happens every time you lose both coordinators. But the roster looks good. Dan Campbell's good. Brad Holmes is great. A lot of good things, but that would be the biggest concern.
Yeah, I agree. That is the biggest one. And then, similar to the Bills and the Ravens, I would add the mental aspect of things. It hasn't happened as often as the Bills or Ravens. But the last 2 years, the Lions, when you're ranking the best teams in the NFL, they're in the top 3. They're in the top 5 consistently throughout the season. So just the mental aspect of 2 years ago, blowing a big lead in the NFC Championship. Last year, losing as big favorites to the Commanders at home in the divisional round. the ability to just stay consistent and get back there, because I thought their resolve and resiliency last year was unbelievable given all the defensive injuries that they had. But now you're dealing with this from a different perspective, which is we've had this incredible nucleus together the last couple of years. And even when they had those injuries, they still had the safety tandem. They still had most of their offensive pieces healthy and ready to go. And they fell short, right? So just the ability to stay consistent and get back to that point and play your best game, right? It always comes down to, like, how do you play your best game in the playoffs with everything on the line? And, we've seen the Lions have a rough second half against the Niners in the NFC Championship, and we saw them have more of a bad first half, but just bad turnovers and bad mistakes in the Commanders game last year. So how do they overcome that? I think that's a reason for concern, you could say, as well.
And then the edge rusher deal, right? Aiden Hutchinson's coming back from a significant leg injury. We don't know if he'll play at that same level next year. Even if he was playing at that same level, the level of competition he's going to be going up against this year will be a lot higher than it was last year before he got hurt. The interior looks great. They've got the guys that have been there already: Lynn McNeil, Levi Onwuzurike, DJ Reader. Now added Tyleik Williams to that. That looks great. The other edge rusher spot, though, opposite Hutchinson, is still like a weakness. Marcus Davenport at this point is basically edge rusher role. Like he's maybe he works out, but like he's Jason Verrett for the edge, right? Maybe you'll get a season where he stays healthy, plays more than 400 snaps, and he actually looks good. But at this point, you probably can't assume you're going to get anything out of him. Josh Paschal, Hassan, the rookie. It's not a strong group outside of Hutchinson.
Let's go Green Bay Packers now. Reasons for concern for the Packers heading into this year. Here's my question. We've talked about the youth and the depth that they've built. Are they just lacking star power? Is that where they're just a tick behind some of the other teams in the NFC, or is that just the big concern? Are they just the same team that is a tick below some of the best teams in the NFC?
Yeah, so the concern would be Green Bay has been like the way that I play Football Manager, right? You end up always chasing young players, and you go get this group of like 19 to 21-year-olds, and you're like, man, the potential of this group is through the roof, but you never actually let it get to the point where they reach that potential, because then you go find another, 19-year-old wonder kid who ends up being your striker again. The whole thing, you just maintain this team that's always not quite as good as it should be in a few years' time, because you're constantly chasing like the young upside players. The Packers have been the youngest roster in the league for years. Like maybe they do need some experienced, just high-end players that can get them over that hump and go from good to great. Because look, it's probably too simple a narrative to look at last year and say this was kind of what they were. But it was such a neat pattern that they were a really good team, but then every time they played a genuine kind of contender, right? Lions, Vikings, even though they lost a game earlier and people thought they would in the postseason, like every time they played one of those games, they lost. And that was and Philadelphia, that was Green Bay's season. They were basically elite until they played an elite team, and then they weren't. They need to get from that to that category. They need to make that jump.
Yeah, last year's Packers team felt a little bit like the Cowboys and Dolphins of the last couple of years, which not like every team with a winning record they would lose to. But, yeah, they lost all their games to the Vikings and the Lions and the good teams, the Eagles. They lost to all the good teams in the NFC. So the concern is, have they done enough? Do they have enough pass rush? Do they have enough in the secondary, whether Jair Alexander's back there or not? Is Jordan Love enough? Right? I mean, last year at this time, we were like, man, you don't get too many of those seasons where you just legitimately flip a switch and things look completely different. That was Jordan Love's 2023. His first year as starter, makes it smooth and easy for the narrative. Took some time, very inconsistent in the first half of the year, but by the end of the year, going toe-to-toe with the Chiefs on Sunday Night Football, going toe-to-toe with the Cowboys, having an incredible game in Dallas in the playoffs. Jordan Love has star potential because of the second half of the season and how well he played. Last year battled injuries and had some ups and downs just as far as his consistency goes. So he's still a bit of a question mark as to what he can become. So I think you just kind of add all that up. The star power thing is just the first thing that I look at when I'm thinking about what the Eagles. Look at the best teams in the NFC the last couple of years: Eagles, the Niners, the Lions, the teams that had consistent success for a few years. They were going to NFC championships and Super Bowls or Super Bowls. They all had a lot of star power, especially the Lions. Look at all the stars that the Lions have right now. Do the Packers have that? Do they need that? Is that a big part of what they're lacking?
Yeah. I mean, I think generally their concern is that they might just be at a level and can't make that jump to the elite teams.
Let's go Chicago Bears. They were, winning the offseason this offseason again. A lot of reasons for optimism. Year 2 of Caleb Williams, but what would be some of the reasons for concern here?
Well, some people pointed out they were the winners of last offseason as well, and that didn't help, or it certainly didn't all work out. So there's always the chance that what looks great on paper right now will not actually look great once you get to football fields in September. The other concern would be, Caleb Williams did not look necessarily like the kind of special talent that he was being talked about year 1. What if the concerns that people had about him as a prospect, the tendency to play too much hero ball, the tendency to hold onto the ball too long. Like, what if those negatives are actually a major flaw in his game? And that's going to be the limiting factor on Caleb Williams going forward.
Yeah, I think that's a fair one. We don't know exactly what that's going to look like. I think as optimistic as I am with Caleb Williams and Ben Johnson, we don't know how that fit's going to be. We've described Ben Johnson as having, Jared Goff that he got the most out of over the last couple of years, who was working through the system, finding open receivers. How are they going to mesh? We still have no idea how Ben Johnson's going to develop Caleb Williams and mesh with him offensively. The offensive line looks better on paper, but, will Caleb Williams continue to make them look worse, right? They've had better looking offensive lines on paper, where over the last few years, Justin Fields and Caleb Williams both made them look worse. Is that going to continue with Caleb Williams? And I would also say defensive line wise, I think they've made good moves, but it's, big investment in an older player like a Grady Jarrett, who has not played his best football in a few years now. Do they have enough juice off the edge and just rushing the passer from the interior to continue to improve on defense? So a lot of reasons for optimism for the Bears, but to me, the biggest question is still obviously Caleb Williams and his development under Ben Johnson.
Yeah.
Well done. Minnesota Vikings, reasons for concern. Coming off a 14-win season, but disappointing playoff first-round exit against the Rams.
Yeah, I mean, I think this one's easy. It's what if J.J. McCarthy isn't good? I mean, pretty simple. They decided, they made the right call, I think, this offseason. Decided, look, the Darnold thing, the ending was scary. It's not what the plan was. Let's stick with the original plan. We'll let him go away. We'll use that money to rebuild the offensive line. All good. But the whole thing falls apart if McCarthy is not able to step in and play good football right away. And whilst the other 5 quarterbacks that were in that draft class at the top all looked good year 1, it would be a pretty insane outcome if all 6 of those guys were amazing. I mean, there's got to be a pretty healthy chance that McCarthy isn't the guy.
You're just playing the odds here. What about Flores' defense? Second straight year where it felt like the first half of the season, it's like, all right, look what this guy's doing. Look what he's doing. And then the second half of the season in some big games, not necessarily having success against the Lions and maybe not putting it all together for the entire year, despite a lot of the personnel additions. Plus, I would say maybe cornerback is still a question mark specifically with the Vikings. So if we're, nitpicking here, obviously J.J. McCarthy is a big question mark. We don't know what he is. So the concern is, we don't know. And then defensively, Flores' defense, can he put together the full season? And do they have enough horses at corner to just to keep up throughout a full season as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's some potential weak areas still on the team, and for that defense. And yeah, I wonder, does that Flores defense? It's dynamic, it's effective, it's dangerous, but I do wonder if it runs out of answers against certain teams. Whether like Ben Johnson has typically had the number of this defense every time they play Detroit. I wonder if there are certain teams where they do have that advantage. And I don't know that because the way they play their defense, their scheme. I don't know how flexible that is week to week. There are teams where if you're like, well, we're playing this team, we're going to completely change what we do. I don't know that this defense is that good at doing that. It's not as nimble as other defenses schematically, and maybe that is a problem in certain games.
Now they still have to play Detroit twice and Ben Johnson twice in the division. So now you're doubling potentially the teams that could have answers to Flores' defense. All right, man, we're halfway through. We're going to go to the West now, starting the AFC West. Denver Broncos, reasons for concern or pessimism for the Broncos? Because we've been pretty positive, but let me start. Did they just overachieve last year? Did they just, because we've said, hey, look, the personnel looks pretty good, but last year at this time we weren't saying that. It's because they played really well as a team defensively. I thought they did a nice job without stars besides Patrick Surtain, star. Maybe they developed another potential star in Nick Benito. Zach Allen played well, but I thought they kind of stitched it together and overachieved on defense relative to expectations. Does Bo Nix have a cap? Did he only have a good season because of all of his experience, and now some of the other quarterbacks in that class will surpass him? Guys like Michael Penix or J.J. McCarthy, or will that not feel as great in year two? Do they have enough playmakers on the outside to go head to head with some of the best teams? Do they have enough of a running game with just adding RJ Harvey at running back? These are all viable questions, I would say, for the Broncos.
Yeah, I mean, I guess they're a little bit low on like proven long-term kind of high-level play. As much as there's a lot of very good players on this defense, or on this team generally, there's not that many of them that have played really high level for a long period of time. And I guess multiple ones of them could just hit the bad end of their range of outcomes and not be the players that we thought they were.
So is that it for Denver? What if Bo Nix does have a limited ceiling? And I think that's kind of like, I don't know, I've probably said that before too, but maybe that's a false accusation on Bo Nix. But
right.
Is there more development to his game, or is he, because you say that because he's got 60 plus starts. So if he is what he is that enough, right? Is Bo Nix maxed out after year one, and he's going to be the guy that we're sitting here 3 years from now? Like, do you really want to give him $60 million? Or, maybe that's where Bo Nix is. That's a reason for concern if you're Denver.
I mean, even just sample size. Like, Bo Nix was impressive last year, but the good play sample size is like half a dozen games. We saw that from, Sam Darnold multiple times with the Jets. Like, what if last year was just a false positive of how good Bo Nix is going to be, and actually he's not that player at all yet?
Let's go Kansas City Chiefs. Reasons for concern for the Chiefs. I'll start with the simple one, Sam, is the whole season we're like, they can't keep doing this. They can't keep doing this, right? I know the last thing we saw was them getting wrecked in the Super Bowl, but they had not been in a blowout in a long time. Either way, like, they had not been in many blowouts over the last 2 years. It's been a whole lot of close games, and they can't keep winning the close games. They can't keep winning with the Raiders botching snaps and blocking game-winning field goals. They can't keep doing it. I mean, that'd be the first concern, is they probably can't keep winning every single close game. And then I think high level, you could say, hey, all this offensive line turnover, there's some indecision or, uncertainty, we'll say, as far as what the offensive line looks like here for the Chiefs with Joe Thuney out and some of the turnover there.
I mean, the whole offense, like, remember a few years ago, the Chiefs had this like historically amazing offense where Mahomes was looking like the best quarterback we'd ever seen. And, they were putting up a ton of points and everything. And I think every aspect of that has kind of gone backwards in the last couple of years. Mahomes has not hit the levels that he hit previously in his career. He's not been bad by any means, but he's definitely not playing his best football and hasn't for a while, at least over a long period of time. Like, individual games, like, Mahomes is still Mahomes, but over a 17-game schedule, he's not hit the heights that he hit previously. The offensive line, as you said before, suddenly that looks iffy, right? You've got Jalen Moore, who's a pretty significant question mark in a low sample size at left tackle. Juwan Taylor, who hasn't lived up to his money. Left guard is probably Kingsley Suamataia, who was supposed to be the left tackle solution, is now going to be the left guard solution because he wasn't the left tackle solution. So suddenly that line could be a weakness. It was obviously it had its ass kicked by the Eagles in the Super Bowl, but more teams than the Eagles might be able to get after that offensive line. The receiving core, has been, I mean, it's now kind of a patchwork of guys that have not necessarily all, number one, played together, number two, done what they were expected to. Marquise Brown was injured for most of last season. We didn't really get to see what he would do. Rashee Rice is coming off a major knee injury now. Xavier Worthy had to do a lot as a rookie, and now we get to see what he can be. But there's a world where that group doesn't necessarily look much better than last year. And actually, they just haven't been able to find this kind of great receiving core again. So, yeah, maybe this offense does not have the ceiling that it had previously.
Yeah, and Travis Kelce was still pretty good for a normal tight end last year, but certainly not the same as what he was. He does look like he's officially on the back end of his career, ready to retire at any point from a physical standpoint. So that's a question, right? We had a question about Mahomes, how he was going to be post Tyreek Hill. He was fantastic for the first year, but years 2 and 3, as you mentioned, if you're just looking Mahomes' production over the last 2 years, it's certainly not what he was the first 4 or 5 years of his career. So I think those are all reasons for concern. But the offensive line uncertainty is a big one, and then just generally, can they keep winning all those close games that they did, because they found a way to win, and I don't know how sustainable that is generally. Let's go Los Angeles Chargers. Reasons for concern for the Chargers. Jim Harbaugh heading into year 2 here.
I think there's still some weaknesses on this roster. I mean, the receiving core has been upgraded, but it's still not exactly a massive strength. When you look at some of the players that they've got, they spent their first round pick on a running back, which you would say is not necessarily the best use of resources. But, what if, Quentin Johnson is still scheduled to start effectively for this team, and he's been a disaster as their first round pick. Ladd McConkey is still the nominal wide receiver 1 as the best guy there. That's not what you want around Justin Herbert, who is a quarterback I think most people say should be in that top echelon talent-wise. The Mahomes, the Josh Allens, the Lamars, the Joe Burrows. Herbert should be in that conversation, and at the moment he's not, in part because of his own play, but in part, I think, because he doesn't have, Jamar Chase and T. Higgins to throw to. He's instead, Ladd McConkey's his wide receiver 1.
Yeah, I think it's fair. The Chargers had a pretty nice defense last year. I think they overachieved last year, I thought, as far as they should have. It should have taken a year maybe for Jim Harbaugh in the new regime to get going, and they had a really nice season. Always kind of lacking in some of the bigger games, and certainly in the playoff game against the Texans. But when they went up against the Chiefs or the Ravens, they were a tick below. So similar to the other teams, have they done enough to get over that hump? Do they have the playmakers to get the most out of Justin Herbert, who I thought played well overall last year? Do they have enough to maybe stop the run up front, as far as, it feels like the eternal, do they have enough bodies and big bodies up front on the defensive line? I think that's a fair question. Rushing the passer as Khalil Mack gets a little bit older, and, do they have enough juice off the edge? I think these are all fair questions for the Chargers, who I think will be good overall. But if we're talking getting over the hump in the AFC, competing with the Ravens, the Chiefs, the Bills, the best teams, I don't know if they're there yet. I don't know if they've done enough just yet, unless they start to see, some big jumps from, a Trey Harris as a rookie, or, some of last year's draft picks, whatever it might be. All fair questions for the Chargers. Raiders, reasons for concern. What do you have for the Raiders besides Geno Smith in the red zone?
Yeah, Geno Smith anytime they get inside the 20. Look, the Raiders for the first time have a legitimate quarterback in Geno Smith for a while, but and I think generally, look, they've moved in the right direction this offseason. The question would simply be, were they starting too far behind everybody? Have they just had too far to come? There's still some significant problems or some significant question marks, and they're in a division with the Chiefs, the Broncos, the Chargers. Are they just the 4th best team in that division still?
Yeah, I'll say high level too. I'm not saying they made the wrong decision here, but we said, hey, should they be better off not trying to win this year and just thinking long term? and they're not. It's not like a go for it move. I think they're doing a nice hybrid of they drafted a ton of volume, and they upgraded a quarterback for a 3rd round pick with Geno Smith. But should they have taken a more of a long term approach? You've added Geno Smith. I think is a solid starting NFL quarterback, the exact type of quarterback where, like a Derek Carr, who the Raiders had for years, you're consistently questioning. You're like, one year they'll make the playoffs or win 11 games, and then the next year you have a losing record. Is that enough to compete with in a division with Mahomes and Reed, with Herbert and Harbaugh, with Sean Payton and Bo Nix, we'll say? Is that enough? Like Geno Smith and an aging Pete Carroll, is that enough to compete, or should they have thought for 26 and 27 and beyond and try to hit the home run at quarterback, which they could still play. You could still play that game if we want to draft a quarterback later and see, but have they done enough? So I think they'll be more competitive, but are you going to be left wanting at the end of the season? Hey, we won 8 games, moving in the right direction, but is that going to be enough? It's the same. And Seattle wasn't even necessarily thinking about moving on from Geno Smith, but they moved on because there was an impasse as far as price and contract expectations, because Seattle recognized, like, I don't think Geno's a $50 million quarterback. I don't think he's going to be that guy for us. And so I think that's part of the concern with the Raiders. Did they make a whole bunch of nice moves to just be pretty good, but you're still going to be left wanting as they are trying to win a championship and win the division, right? You're always trying to win the division, and you have high standards to reach here with the Chiefs in that division.
Yeah, I mean, I like what they've done, but you look at the sort of the starting units on both sides of the ball, and there's still just so many players that you think should not be NFL starters, right? That are penciled in to be starting on either side of the ball, whether it's defense where, Eric Stokes could be starting at one cornerback spot, Jacorian Bennett maybe starting in the other. Jeremy Chin has been wildly up and down in his career. Like Devin White may end up seeing major playing time for this team at linebacker. Devin White has been not good from the majority of his NFL career at linebacker. They still might not have a wide receiver 1 with Jacoby Myers and Jack Bash each being sort of more 2s than they are number 1 guys. There's just a lot of areas on this team where you say we could upgrade at a lot of spots still. So I think the reason for concern is they were simply coming from too low an ebb to be really good right away.
All right, let's go NFC West here. Arizona Cardinals, reasons for concern. We've been pretty optimistic about the Cardinals and a lot of what they've done this offseason, but let's turn the tables here. What should we still be concerned about with the Cardinals?
I wonder if Kyler Murray is just now becoming this kind of inconsistent quarterback. Like,
that was my starting
his career has been weird, where it's like number 1 overall pick, obviously, and then a kind of injury, a rough start. But then he had that one season where he looked like he was putting it all together, and he was leading the league in big time throw rate and big time throws, period, from a volume standpoint. The performance was off the charts. And then he gets the serious injury and he comes back, and we get kind of the rebuilding of his career late in the year. And now we got to see last season. And it's like, he's like, the talent is undeniable. He's capable of amazing games. And even last season we saw, 2 or 3 of the most spectacular games any quarterback had. But he's just not doing it consistently week in, week out. And you have that whole, him not being able to get on the same page with Marvin Harrison all year. Like, and the height thing from an NFL quarterback point of view, it's been dispelled in terms of you can't play in the NFL if you're short, right? Clearly, that's not the case anymore. Between Russell Wilson, Kyler Murray, Bryce Young, you can play in the NFL if you are 5'10". It's not a problem in the way, teams used to be like, I'm not even touching that guy. Like the narrative on Russell Wilson, if you believe it, from a bunch of people was like, we would have taken that guy in the first round if he was 6'2". But he was 5'10" or 5'11", so he had to go in the third. That's kind of changed now, where Kyler Murray and Bryce Young, they can go number 1 overall at that height. But it's not to say it doesn't affect things, right? It's not to say being that height does not change or affect the way you play the game. And it does. It's something you have to work around. Like, you can't just play the game like Peyton Manning at 5'10". You have to play the game in a different way. And that might sort of put you into this box of I wonder if you're able to be consistently elite every single week with that kind of style, or if it introduces this level of variance and volatility that you simply can't sustain every single week.
Yeah. Does that cap your ceiling, so to speak, just from a consistency perspective and being able to attack all levels of the field? Yeah, I had the same question about Kyler as maybe a reason for concern, as far as his consistency. I would say generally speed on offense. I like having I don't know if they have a specific, vertical threat. Maybe Marvin Harrison Jr. has elements of that, but he's going to do it with he's a less dynamic presence than you would expect as far as that guy. So I would say that's generally a concern. The other part I would say, as far as the draft goes, which I liked, and I liked the players. I liked Walter Nolan. I liked taking Will Johnson. There's a little bit of boom or bust there with Will Nolan, maybe some of Walter Nolan with some of his questions. Will Johnson coming off the injury. A guy like Jordan Birch with his proverbial upside as far as an athlete who's never really put it all together as a pass rusher. There's a little boom or bust, I would say, to their draft as well, even though I love the volume that they've thrown at the defense and the defensive front in particular. There's some questions for a lot of those players. So I think those are all reasons for concern for the Cardinals. Let's go Rams here. Rams reason, because again, we've been really optimistic about the Rams. Let me start with Stafford, because they made this little playoff run. I mean, they won a game in the playoffs last year. 2 years ago, I was half joking that Stafford should have been in the MVP conversation. It's like we had no idea what their team was going to be. And Stafford was balling, taking care of the ball, big-time throws, helping to develop Puka Nacua. Felt like last year Stafford was being carried. The offense was being carried a little bit by the defense down the stretch. Stafford, all the offseason talk, trade talk, getting older, injuries, not long-term injuries, but just always banged up. I'm going to start with that, with Stafford coming off of his worst year in a while, despite me loving a lot of what the Rams have done around him.
Yeah, well, I mean, he's getting old now, right? Stafford's 37 at this point. That's the age where quarterbacks used to be done.
That's when we all start to lose it. About 37.
Well, this is the problem. Like Tom Brady and, Aaron Rodgers, these quarterbacks that have pushed this thing up to beyond 40 and still been playing high-level football, they've kind of broken everybody's idea of when a quarterback decline should come. And maybe that is the new reality, that more quarterbacks will be able to play into their 40s than previously. But quarterbacks used to be done at 37. Like Joe Montana, Eli, I think, was done at 37. Peyton Manning was a miracle to push it to 39, but then the wheels fell off. This is the age where quarterbacks used to lose it physically. And maybe that still holds for some quarterbacks, and maybe that will be more the exception than the rule. But it would be crazy to say, Matthew Stafford at 37, it's just not a factor. We don't even need to think about it. Tom Brady played at 44 or whatever, and he was still good. Why do we got years of good play left in Stafford? At 37, you have to at least be thinking, what if this is the year where he's just not capable of that anymore? The injuries will start to stack up. The arm diminishes. Age would just take its toll, right? I think that's a reasonable thing to at least put out there as a contributing factor to Matthew Stafford at this point.
Brady broke everybody's brain because he had basically a Hall of Fame career after the age of 37, never mind, starting at 37. So yeah, it is. I think that's a fair starting point as far as concern goes. I would say defensively, maybe cornerback, the Darius Williams, Ahkello Witherspoon combination, if they're the starting corners, Kobe Durant in the mix there. Perhaps a weakness on the defensive side of the ball. I would also say, as far as the defensive front goes, very impressive what they did. We were raving about the Rams defense down the stretch last year, but they weren't the most physical unit, right? I love Braden Fisk and Kobe Turner, not the most physically imposing unit. It's not a great, stop the run type of group of defensive tackles, and that got exploited at times. So I think they might have that weakness still when you go up against the Lions and the Eagles. We saw that last year. 2 Eagles games, week 1 against the Lions, when they needed to get really physical and stop the run. They did not do a great job of that. Again, it was better down the stretch, but it showed up in the playoffs again against the Eagles. So I think that's still a concern for this Rams defense.
Yeah, potential weakness. Just one more thing on the Stafford thing with being 37. Stafford, for his career, has been Iron Man toughness, right? Like one of his defining characteristics as a quarterback has been his ability, willingness to battle through injuries and to take hits. Like his career has almost been more like those 90s quarterbacks where they took shots that guys don't take anymore. Stafford has taken those hits in his career. So like he has not necessarily protected himself the way some of these other quarterbacks that are now going to play into their 40. Like his career might look more like the quarterbacks from the 90s in terms of how long it's going to last because of that.
All right, let's go San Francisco 49ers. Reasons for concern for the Niners. I mean, it has to start with just the general turnover on this roster the last couple of years, right?
Yeah, I mean, just the decline of the roster. I think this is not as good a roster as it was a couple of years ago. They have hemorrhaged talent, and they're relying now on a draft effectively to replace a lot of that talent, and they've been one of the worst drafting teams in the league over the last few years. So that's your big area of concern.
Then you just get into what we described about the Dolphins, right? You've lost this first contract quarterback advantage, the ability to have, I mean, how many $20 million a year players did they have on the roster? You're unable to pay the Javon Hargraves of the world anymore because we're prepping for the Brock Purdy contract, and not even debating whether he's worth it or not. He has to play at a similar level, and then you lose maybe two or three other players, right? You lose two or three other options of starting caliber players, so it puts more pressure on the team to draft. And like we said, I think the last year's draft 24, a lot of optimism for that draft. We'll see what happens with this year's rookie class, but they're now at the point where they need to start hitting on some draft picks because they haven't found a ton of impact players on the drafts. Let's say 21, 22, 23, other than maybe Purdy.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think and that's already happened to a degree, right? They traded away Deebo Samuel. I think generally the skill position players are still in a really good spot. Brandon Ayuk is still there. Juwan Jennings, I think, showed he's capable of more in a bigger role than they've needed him for in the past. George Kittle is still there. Christian McCaffrey is still there. Ricky Pearsall should be better year two in that he probably won't get shot this offseason. So all these things are good. But the concern is more, I mean, Trent Williams is now reaching the Tyron Smith, Teron Armstead world of you probably have to budget missed games in just as a matter of course for him. He's missed games, most of the last few seasons now. Not a lot of them, but you're probably going to have to budget in some missed time for Trent Williams. Like he's reaching the end of his career. The contingency plans behind him are not great. The rest of that offensive line is not necessarily in great shape. Dominic Pooney at right guard is good. Colton McKivitz is okay at right tackle, but like that line might be a weakness again heading into this year. And, Brock Purdy's got to do more.
And I would add the pass rush specifically. Nick Bosa, still a star, but they go Micah Williams in the first round. One of his questions was consistent pass rush productivity, battled through injuries. He's not an explosive athlete, but he's long and he has potential, but he hasn't really gotten there consistently yet from Georgia. And then even just behind him, just the depth on the defensive line. So that's definitely a concern for the Niners, for a team that when they went to the Super Bowl 2 years ago, they were one of those teams that we said, look at the depth, look at their 8 deep on this defensive line. They have backups like a Javon Kinlaw who went on to make money as starters. That's the type of depth that they had 2 years ago. They've been depleted on that defensive line. They're trying to replenish in the draft this year. We just don't know exactly how that's going to go right off the bat.
Yeah, which is, they needed to, but they haven't drafted well in the last couple of years. So they need that draft class this year to be very good because they put themselves in that situation.
All right, let's go Seattle Seahawks. Wrap it up with the NFC West. I'll start with this. I like the way they navigated the offseason after the Geno Smith move, but Geno Smith and DK Metcalf to Sam Darnold and let's say Cooper Kupp, just to oversimplify, is that a lateral move? Is that actually an upgrade? I think that's a fair question. Right off the bat for Seattle, did they actually get better this offseason with the Geno Smith, Sam Darnold moves plus, say, DK in the receiving core?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a perfect. What if Darnold just turns back into a pumpkin? I mean, we were waiting for it all last season. It didn't really come until right at the end, but then it came hard. I mean, he turned completely back into a pumpkin. He went all the way back to Sam Darnold seeing ghosts, Sam Darnold. So what if that happens? Like, what if they just gave that guy the contract they just gave him? Sure, you can console yourself with the idea that there's an out after a year or two. But if that's your quarterback right now, then Jalen Milroe starting by like week 6, like that's a non-zero possibility for this team, that you just got rid of Geno Smith, who, whatever we think about him and his problems in the red zone, is a good quarterback. And you might have replaced him with a guy that you need to sit his ass down before the end of November.
Yeah, I mean, is Sam Darnold a one-year wonder, product of Kevin O'Connell, product of those receivers? You know, I think the receiving core in Minnesota was outstanding, and the confidence that he had in Jordan Addison and Justin Jefferson, I thought was pretty clear. And so that's a fair question, I think, with Seattle. Again, I like a lot of what they've done from a team building perspective over the last couple of years. And then the offensive line still has to be a question, right? The offensive line, they did draft Gray Zabel, but we're talking about an FCS left tackle, asking him to step in right away and have success at guard. And we still have questions on the interior of the offensive line. You still have questions at right tackle. Abe Lucas has been hurt often the last few years, and he hasn't played as well as he did as a rookie. So I would say you still have question marks on 4 out of 5 offensive line spots, despite Charles Cross at left tackle continued to progress, look great last year overall. I think you have legit questions at 4 spots. It doesn't mean they're not making the right moves or moving in the right direction, but there's at least questions, including Zabel as a first-round pick.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's the pessimism show, right? What if Gray Zabel is just an FCS player that does? I mean, that if you look at the track record, North Dakota State has had a ton of offensive linemen drafted in the last half dozen years. The track record of them becoming good NFL players is actually not good. Like you would assume, because that pipeline seems so strong, and they're kind of I don't know if it's because of the North Dakota State thing, but they tend to become like quite popular pre-draft picks. Like people gravitate to those North Dakota State offensive linemen as like, here's my guy, like he's going to be good. Their track record's actually pretty cheeks. So maybe Gray Zabel is actually not good. Like that's not an unreasonable.
Joe Hay.
It's not an unreasonable, concern to be throwing out there. And as you said, even if he is good, that's 2 spots on the left side that are set. Charles Cross and Gray Zabel. Center is still a weakness. Right guard is still a weakness. Right tackle might be a weakness if Abe Lucas doesn't get better and or stay healthy. Added to that, you might only have 1 receiver, right? JSN looks really good, but DK Metcalf is gone now. Tyler Lockett is gone now. Cooper Kupp is in, but he's old and busted and declined and not the player that he used to be. Then you're relying on rookies or Marquez Valdez-Scantling. Like that's, I like Torrey Horton. He was a sleeper pick of mine. But again, the last guy I thought was like that was Troy Franklin. He was garbage year 1. So what if their only receiver is JSN, in addition to, 3 question mark spots on the offensive line?
You're cooking now. You're starting to feel it. You're starting to feel the pessimism flow. And it's like, we used to just say one thing. Now I got 10 things. I got 10 things to be pessimistic about. You're starting to feel it right now. Let's bring it for the AFC South then, because Texans fans, they're always looking to attack you anyway. So let's be pessimistic about the Kalen Bullock's going to blow 8 coverages again this year, except the passes are going to get caught instead. Let's start with that now. I'm just kidding. Texans, no reasons for concern.
Well, let's start with the offensive line. This was the worst offensive line in the NFL last year, and they traded away the one good player from it. So what if the line's just as bad as it was last year? Then nothing matters anymore because it's so bad the offense effectively can't function.
And I don't think Stroud had a bad season last year, but it was certainly worse than it was as a rookie. What if that's more his baseline now? And his first season was a little bit of, Bobby comes in and they had this Shanahan scheme and it was just a really nice combination, and that's been caught up to a little bit. And what if Stroud settles in as just, pretty good and not the future star that he looked like? That's a reason for concern, right? The fact that he has to bounce back from a sophomore slump here, which did coincide with, I think in offensive line issues and receiver injuries for sure.
I mean, I was really impressed by Stroud last year anyway, but my point would be more like that's like his ceiling if the line doesn't get better. I mean, that, even if you think he's like a truly elite caliber quarterback, he showed last year he's not able to play at that level over the course of a season if your line is so bad that it's just if it's the level it was a year ago. So my concern would be, look at that starting 5. you downgraded at left tackle, and the other 4 guys are the same 4 guys from a year ago, effectively, or at least were part of that worst offensive line in the NFL. In fact, weren't even starters in some cases on the worst offensive line in the NFL heading into the year. So what if that group is just every bit as bad as it was last season?
And then I'll just say defensively, I mean, there's a lot to like defensively, the depth on the defensive line, the star power on the defensive line, the star power in the secondary with Derek Stingley. They still gave up a lot of big plays, long touchdowns, very prevalent against this defense last year. And as we've highlighted many times on the show, a lot of missed touchdowns. I don't think we're being overly nitpicky on just the Texans versus other defenses. There were many times Brian Thomas Jr. and Mac Hollins, like there were many times receivers were running open on the secondary and their QBs just missed it, whether it was Mac Jones, Josh Allen, Trevor Lawrence, whoever. That happened often last year. So for a defense that was extremely talented and caused some havoc, they did allow a lot of big plays last year, and that certainly needs to get cleaned up.
Yep.
Let's go Indianapolis Colts. Reasons for concern for the Colts. Starting with, what if they just don't have a good quarterback between Anthony Richardson and Daniel Jones?
Yeah, well, it's kind of like the Steelers situation. The reason for concern is that the current quarterback situation is a battle in training camp between Anthony Richardson and Daniel Jones. The end. I mean, like that says everything, right? They drafted a quarterback in the top 5 a couple of years ago, and he's now in a competition for his job with Daniel Jones, who was already failed his way out of one franchise.
And I think what I said about the Packers, too, are they just lacking stars and they're just solid across the board? I feel like that's been our descriptor of the Colts for years now, but they also have not had a quarterback, say, as good as Jordan Love, just to finish the Packers comparison. So they've been, it's a good offensive line, and they've built a pretty good receiving room, and they've got some depth on the D line, and the corners are okay. Are they just lacking in high impact players on this roster, in addition to the quarterback questions? And Jonathan Taylor has shown some star power, but he's a running back. How much impact can you have? So yeah, I think these are all reasons for concern for the Colts. Are they merely just good without where if you plopped a top 8 quarterback on this roster, you would say, okay, now you got something, but they haven't had that. They haven't had that quarterback in this revolving door of quarterback options over the last few years. So I think that's generally a concern. There's turnover on the offensive line too. Remember, we're over here high-fiving the Vikings for bringing in 2 Colts offensive linemen, Ryan Kelly and Will Fries, center and right guard. Well, they're out now in Indianapolis. So Tanner Bortolini stepping in at center, maybe Matt Goncalves, who played tackle last year, and others competing at right guard. Like, those are question marks here for the Colts as well.
Yeah, because those guys have been injured, Ryan Kelly, Will Fries, like the backups that the Colts have to step in, have actually seen some game time. So I think we're less concerned about them than we would be with other teams that are putting in, new, fresh starters. But yeah, they're probably downgrades. So you've downgraded multiple spots on the offensive line in an offseason. But I mean, yeah, and I think you're right. It's an unknown how good the rest of this roster is, because we haven't you need the quarterback in order to get a full gauge of how good everybody else is. And without that, it's tough to know. But I think generally, like, it all comes back to the big question mark is the quarterback spot. Like, those things are maybe fringe concerns and unknowns, but like the biggest area of concern is that Anthony Richardson and Daniel Jones are battling it out in training camp for the starting job.
And if Richardson isn't the guy after this year, even if Jones has a great year, you're almost to the point where, think about this situation. Jones has a great year, and you're debating, is he the future now in Indianapolis? Do we lock him up long-term? The same debate the Giants had a couple years ago, or do we go to the draft? And I don't think that's going to be a comfortable situation for the Colts if that's what they're faced with, if Richardson does not develop here. Jacksonville Jaguars.
Or you have the sort of Sam Darnold conversation that the Vikings had this offseason, right? Like, he played really well. Did he play enough that we need to completely change the entire plan and throw him the keys and give him a big money contract? Like, except you
don't have an alternative on the roster theoretically to turn to.
Yeah. But it's so interesting, sort of the extremes that you need to see in order to change your mind on something like that. Like, Sam Darnold played 15 games of Pro Bowl caliber play, and then 2 games at the end of it may have changed the entire dynamic. They may have literally changed the Vikings approach with just 2 games at the death.
All right, let's go Jacksonville Jaguars here. Reasons for concern for the Jags.
Is it Trevor Lawrence? Is it that he might not actually be that great?
Yeah, I think that's where I would start. I was really concerned with his play last year. And look, I don't know what happens with Doug Peterson, where it seems like the early part of his tenures are better than the end, whether it was the Eagles or the Jags. Now we have two teams, and our friend Nate Tice was talking about that. JT O'Sullivan, when he does his breakdowns, is like, I just don't love this offense, right? There's no advantages here. And so we don't know. That's a question mark. But Trevor Lawrence not taking that big step forward, right? There was a point where the trajectory made sense, right? He's a year and a half into his career. Switch flipped for him. And we always talked about this. Like, it's an easy narrative. Young quarterback figures it out. Now we're there. Now we've arrived, and they've reached this new baseline. And Lawrence hit a strong baseline for probably the second half of his second year, first half of his third year, and then tapered off, had injuries. Year 4 was a concern, and here we are in year 5. And, what is he? So I think that's still a fair concern. And if he's merely just a good quarterback, that's okay. But it's still a concern that I don't know if you're still chasing this like superstardom from Trevor Lawrence.
Yeah, I mean, look, what they've put around him now is starting to be really enticing. Brian Thomas Jr. looks like an absolute superstar. Travis Hunter, it could be an amazing complementary piece. De'Ami Brown is amazing as a wide receiver 3. You've got weapons now, but what if Lawrence is just solid but not actually great? He missed so many throws to Brian Thomas Jr. last season. He's missed a lot of throws throughout his NFL career. What if he just has a ceiling that isn't where people thought it was when he was anointed the greatest quarterback prospect since, Peyton Manning or John Elway or whoever? I think that's becoming a real question mark. It's a big year for him now. Like, he needs to show that he's capable of that level, not just good.
The other thing I would say, we love Travis Hunter as a prospect and everything. Did they put too many eggs into that basket, right? The pressure on Travis Hunter, not only to be an effective receiver first, perhaps a 1.5 type of generational player, but then it's always going to coincide with, well, they don't have next year's first round pick. They don't, it's 3 players for the price of 1 for Travis Hunter. Essentially, there's a lot of pressure on Hunter now, and a reason for concern because, he has to somewhat live up to that.
Well, there's several. I mean, all of the negative aspects of the whole Travis Hunter unique dynamic become interesting. Number one, what if he's just a bust? Like, what if Travis Hunter, like, players, the strike rate in the draft is awful, even at the top. What if the Jags just went after this guy who's unique, who's talented, who's, top cornerback and wide receiver 1 in this draft? What if he's just not the guy, right? What if he's Jeffrey Okudah, but on both sides of the ball? Well, then you just utter disaster. You just traded effectively 3 players for a guy that stinks, and he stinks at both sides of the ball. That's possible. What if he can't play both ways at the NFL level? What if it's just too much? What if the meeting schedule, the workload, the mental ability, like all of it is just too much, and he can't play both sides of the ball? Well, now you got to make a call. What is he? Is he wide receiver? Is he cornerback? Where are we playing him? What if the durability is a problem at that? It's not a mental thing. It's actually the dude's 180 pounds, and asking him to play 140 snaps a game is just too much for the guy. He can't handle that. What if that's a problem? Or what if the other thing that people said is, what if he's actually not that great at either of them, but what's amazing is he can do both, right? But what if the margin there between college and the NFL is significant, and actually he's just a marginal player at both sides of the ball? And now you've got a guy who can play both sides, but not well, right? Like, he can play 125, 130, 140 snaps a game, but he won't be actually good during those 140 snaps. And you've just got this unique player who happens to be playing both sides of the ball without actually making too huge a contribution on either side. All of those things are at least within the realm of possibilities for Travis Hunter.
I'll just add specifically on the roster, the chat's mentioning the tight end group doesn't look great after they traded Evan Ingram, or Evan Ingram's out. Offensive line looks just okay. Defensive line, I think Josh Hines-Allen is the only high-end playmaker there. We'll see if Trayvon Walker can still continue to develop. And then secondary-wise, I thought Monteric Brown did pretty well, filling in as a starter last year. But him and Tyson Campbell, like, if you're ranking, and Jordan Lewis in the mix, if you're ranking cornerback groups, it's probably still in the bottom 10 in the NFL. So there's still questions up and down this roster, which, again, you pair that with Travis Hunter and going to get him and giving up multiple picks, like you've left a few other holes on this roster that I think still need help.
And obviously, you have to raise the question of whether Liam Cohn angered the football gods and brought bad juju by the way he said Duval.
It's always a massive concern if Liam is too corny to be a head coach in Jacksonville. Tennessee Titans wrapping this up in the AFC South here. And then we have one more division. Reasons for concern with Tennessee. What if Cam Ward's just not the guy?
Yeah. I mean,
that's it.
Easy starting point, right? Cam Ward, very impressive college player. He does, however, make a lot of boneheaded decisions. What if that's just an inherent problem in his game and he's going to toss the ball to the defense, multiple times a game and he's not the guy? I mean, that's easy, but it's the biggest concern.
What if he's just Will Levis with less mayo? I mean, what if that's the case?
Yeah. Well, not even so much. What if he's Will Levis, but with more positive plays, right? So Will Levis with more positive plays that isn't necessarily enough positive plays to make it worth it, right? Like Will Levis was nowhere near enough positive plays to make it worth it. Somewhere there are enough positive plays where you can overlook glaring mistakes in, every single game, but it's quite a high number. Like what if Cam Ward just is better than Levis at that, but not good enough to make it worth it?
Other concerns I would say, receiving core generally, and we've said this before. Anytime Calvin Ridley is your one, I have concerns. When Calvin Ridley is your two, I feel great. I mean, it's oversimplified, but I think it's true. So questions there. Offensive line wise, I'd say the lack of development from Peter Skoronski, little concerning. Lloyd Cushenberry, right? On paper, those guys should have been better the last couple of years. They weren't. So I think they have creep back toward average ability on the offensive line, but I would want to see it. And then I'll just say the pass rush generally, they do not have any established pass rush presence besides maybe the Jeffrey Simmons, interior rush, but on the edge, they've got questions.
Yeah, I mean, the offensive line took a step forward. It was the worst offensive line in the NFL for 2 or 3 straight years. It's better than that, but it still has like bottom third potential, which is a problem. Dan Moore Jr., he's been average when he doesn't play Myles Garrett, but that's still not great, right? Like Dan Moore Jr. could easily have a rough year in any given season. I mean, new environment, just the change in offense, et cetera, et cetera. Dan Moore could go out there and post like a 55 PFF grade next year and it wouldn't raise eyebrows, right? And that would be a problem if he did that. Skoronski has played barely above that level anyway at left guard. Cushenberry is capable of that kind of season as well. Kevin Zeitler is old and it's a great stopgap, but what if this is 1 year too much for him? And then JC Latham at right tackle, didn't look amazing year one, may not get any better than that. Like you could have 5 below average offensive linemen without that much work. Like it wouldn't be beyond the realms of possibility. So, and if that happened, this would be a bad offensive line. This would be a problem for Cam Ward. This would be a problem for the run game, and the offense would have a real issue trying to overcome that. I don't think it will happen. I think the average, the range of outcomes for that group is higher than that, but it's certainly possible.
All right, man. One more division to break down with a little pessimism, finishing in the NFC South, starting with the Atlanta Falcons. Reasons for concern in Atlanta.
We're dealing with a really small sample size of Michael Penix. What if that was just a mirage and he's not that great? Or he gets another knee injury. He's had multiple significant ones in his career so far. What if 6 minutes into week one, he tears an ACL again?
What if year two, what if the sophomore jinx for former PFFers turned offensive coordinators is a real thing? What if Zach just isn't good?
Yeah, we only have one data point so far, but it's not a great one.
By the way, we might be able to break this right now. As of right now, we have Zach Robinson scheduled to join the show. Maybe that was Bobby's downfall. He didn't want to join the show. But Zach's going to join. Hopefully next week we'll record something and have him on. Maybe Memorial Day we'll drop that. So we're going to talk to Zach about all this. But yeah, Michael Penix, a small sample size. I would also just say all eggs in the one basket of the edge rushers and how much they've gone all in the draft the last couple of years. So few draft picks.
Yeah,
for a couple of years now for Atlanta, it generally hurts the depth of your team over time.
sure. And even just the James Pierce gamble, like that I think is a fairly significant gamble for a guy who a lot of people were scared away from, right? Most people sort of agreed that he had top, mid first round potential or ability or tape, but the off-field stuff was scaring people away to the point where his consensus ranking was like fringe first round player, right? So even just that, the specter of that stuff being out there in every single draft report was effectively costing him half a round in the first of like consensus projection. The Falcons not only ignored that, but went and traded next year's first to go get him. Like, what if James Pierce is exactly that guy and immediately like Jermaine Burton's his way out off the team?
Possible. Jermaine Burton's having a good mini camp. All right, you keep his name out of this. Anyway, what if they can't rush the passer again? What if all this investment in Leonard Floyd, Jalen Walker, James Pierce, last year's draft picks, what if they still can't rush the quarterback? Because they were awful getting after the quarterback. I know there was a point where they had high sack totals. I don't know where they finished, but a lot of it was cleanup stuff and coverage sacks. Like, they were not affecting the quarterback effectively. The other thing I'll just highlight, sometimes teams do this, right? They feel set on one side of the ball and put all their resources into the other side. Like, they have made zero changes to this offense. They other than center, they lose Drew Dahlman. Ryan Newziel steps in as the starter. A lot of times it's like that doesn't. You have one injury and then you feel the depth depleted. Are they too fragile on offense, I guess is what I'm saying, because they've had to go all in on defense, whether it was signings or the draft. So that's maybe my other concern for the Falcons here, that the offense is they made some investments last year with Darnell Mooney, Ray McLeod, but have they done enough over the last couple of years on offense to the point where they've lost some depth there? But yeah, I think just they're all in, man. They're all in on Penix and this current roster, so they have to produce. Let's go Carolina Panthers. Reasons for concern. What if Bryce Young's just too short and his arm's not good and he lost his confidence this offseason? What if he just turns back into a pumpkin?
Well, that would be the confidence thing, I think, would be real. That would be, I think, my question. I think he played for a long enough that I'm not that worried that he just I don't think week one, right? It's last year's week one Bryce Young. I doubt that happens where he just shows up as the bad version of Bryce Young again. I would assume he starts off somewhere in the groove again. But when you've seen him already effectively melt down, that at least raises the question of what happens if there's a bad game in there. Like, how fragile is his confidence after rebuilding himself and coming back and looking great? How much would it take to get the old version back again? Like, how easy is it to break him now from a mental point of view, because it's already happened once?
And we just have to be fair as the wet blanket of pessimism on everybody. I mean, we were just talking about, so we've done this with many fan bases through the years where the story's clean. Stroud, year one. Trevor Lawrence, after 1.5 years, turned the corner. Jordan Love, we just talked about. Boom, flip the switch. And we've said this from about 3 different quarterbacks already on the show, guys who did not have this linear progression, right? If that was true, Stroud would have been a top 5 quarterback last year. If that was true, Lawrence would have been sitting in the top 5 the last couple of years. Love would have been an MVP candidate last year if guys continue to just progress and get better. So we can't just expect that from Bryce Young. And let's be as encouraging as his play was last year, if he merely plays at that level, is that enough? I mean, that's a fair question too. So, I mean, we don't really know exactly what to expect from Bryce Young, even though obviously we're on the optimistic side of what the trajectory is. It's not always linear, so we don't know where that's going to land.
I got a good one. What if it turns out that Dr. Eager actually can't math and he's been providing the wrong numbers for the whole time he's been there? He's been there like a year. Oh. What if the math's been bad the whole way and all these guys have been? We just haven't carried the one from the second he got there, and all the data is wrong.
All the data is wrong. Trayvon Merrick and Pat Jones and all the players that they invested in, all the draft picks, that just the math's been off.
Right.
Whoops.
Like we forgot to carry the one, and if they had, Milton Williams would be there.
I loaded the wrong file. Maybe. You never know. It could be Eric's fault. It could be their downfall. And then, rushing the passer, same thing as maybe the Falcons.
Yeah.
They were so bad rushing the quarterback. There's a lot of pressure on the return of Derek Brown and then the 2 draft picks, Nick Scorton and Princely. And yeah, the other investment of Bobby Brown and Pat Jones II and Tershawn Wharton, like they've thrown a lot at it, but none of those players have actually done it at a high level rushing the passer in the NFL.
Yeah, they did kind of what the Falcons did last year, what the Patriots did last year, which is you decide not to go, with your biggest area of need in the first round, and you come back and try and attack it later on with multiple picks, right? The Falcons did that where everyone assumed they were going to take an edge rusher in the top 10. They get Michael Penix, and they then start adding those guys, multiple rounds late. I think this is coincidence. I don't think this is necessarily the way this would work if you ran it, 1,000 times. But in both those instances, it didn't work year one, right? Like the lesser players that you picked outside of the first round did not solve the problem, even though you threw multiple picks at it. So Carolina effectively did that this time, right? Everyone was giving them Jalen Walker in the first round. They went, no, we're going to grab Tetairoa McMillan. And then we're going to come back and get Nick Scorton. We're going to get Princely Umanmielen. But what if there's a reason those guys were ranked lower, and had you taken the guy in the first round, that was actually the better solution?
And ironically, the numbers generally say get your edges in the first, your receivers in the second, and the Panthers flipped it. Now, again, I think the depth of this draft, it made sense to do it this way. But historically, if you're being serious, you don't find a lot of impact edge rushers in rounds 2 and 3. And so you're banking on that is the way the Panthers
the math was off.
The math was off. That's Eric's fault. I wonder if Eric's made it to this point in the show. If he's listening still.
He is. He's probably not listening beyond this.
Turned it off in disgust right now. New Orleans Saints, reasons for pessimism. I just saw through the feed here, Cynthia Freeland of NFL Network in the NFL has them with the lowest projected wins. So we could start with that. Cynthia's model has them with the lowest projected wins this year at 5.3 with the for the Saints.
Yeah, I mean, their quarterback just retired. So they're in a kind of like the Colts, except even more sad, I think. Their quarterback battle for the starting job is Tyler Shuck versus Spencer Rattler versus Jake Hayner, I guess. That's not good.
Forced rebuild. I mean, I picture like Mickey Loomis, like tied up in a closet. Like, you're not spending, you're not trading up. We're rebuilding this thing. And then Carr retires, and it's like further evidence that they're doing it. So I think that's a positive that they're maybe going to have to attack the roster from a rebuild perspective. But clearly the reasons for concern is they're depleted, man. They're depleted on the offensive line and the defensive line. They're depleted on both sides of the ball. And so it's not a good looking roster right now. And your quarterback's 25, your second round quarterback's, a 25-year-old that you're hoping is the next guy. So it's a Tyler Shuck and Spencer Rattler and Jake Hayner battling it out at quarterback. And, hopefully you find somebody. But the reason for concern is the roster's beat up and you don't know who your quarterback is.
Yeah, I mean, let's assume for a minute Tyler Shuck wins the job. There's a lot of red flags surrounding him being your quarterback this year and being good. Number one, you got him in the second round, and generally speaking, it's almost a binary deal now. If you think the quarterback is the guy, he's going in the first. If he's lasting till 40, it probably is a fairly solid indicator that most people think he isn't. Number two, as you said, he's 25. There's not that much high-end play on his resume, in part because the guy got a bunch of weird injuries in his career where, like, the man's bones were just snapping left, right, and center. That doesn't feel like conducive to high-level NFL play where the bodies are bigger, the impacts are more painful. I would be concerned about that. Number three, he's got that worst play of all time on his resume, which I honestly would have sympathy for the argument that that's individually prohibitive. Like, I would have an argument. I would absolutely entertain a serious argument from somebody that says that one play on its own is eliminates him from, like, immediately takes him off the board. Like, I cannot believe that a guy who can do that can be a high-level NFL quarterback. It's that bad. All of those things are altogether for Tyler Shough.
And then again, roster-wise, Chris Olave is your number one receiver. Question marks beyond that. Olave's got his own concussion concerns. Turnover at corner the last couple of years with Marshawn Lattimore, Paulson Adebo out. So you have questions at, Kool-Aid McKinstry stepping in full-time as a starter. Isaac Yiadom, Quincy Riley as a mid-round pick trying to fill that spot. So, yeah, there's just questions up and down the roster, I think, certainly compared to other teams in addition to the quarterback questions.
Yeah.
All right, man.
Not a great roster on top of the fact that one of those three guys is going to win the job.
Yes. Let's wrap it up. Team 32 out of 32, the Tampa Bay Bucks. Reasons for concern for the Bucks.
Kind of like a couple of the other teams where, like, are they just good but not actually capable of bridging the gap to great? Like, what can the Bucks do what the Eagles did last year? Like, is that even within their range of outcomes this year? I don't know. That would be, I think, my big concern.
Yeah, I'm in a similar spot, right? Again, if we say the Eagles took a few hits from a roster perspective, the Lions looked vulnerable in that one game against the Commanders last year, and if you say, well, the Bucks have just brought everybody back and they continue to draft and develop, and maybe they're ready to take that next step to get into that tier, I think it's a fair picture to paint. But you could also say they're not there yet, and that they haven't shown. And Baker Mayfield maybe hasn't put the consistency together week to week to compete with the Eagles and the best teams in the NFC. I would also just say defensive line wise, I think there's some questions as far as their ability to consistently rush the passer. We're looking at a Hassan Reddick coming in on a 1-year deal to pair with Yaya Diaby. Is that enough? Off the edge, maybe some inconsistency in the secondary. We had one really good year of Zion McCollum. Can he keep that up at corner as a starter opposite Jamel Dean? Dean's had his own. He's getting older. These guys, can they keep it up? So I think those are kind of nitpicky though, because the Bucks have done a really nice job building this roster and returning a lot of their key players.
I would also raise the question of what the loss of Liam Cohen does. Like, they've had multiple years now where they've lost kind of the offensive mind that's helped piece Baker Mayfield back together and, put this offense in good shape. There was some continuity there. Now that's a completely different direction again. Like, does that dude has got to be approaching records for like new offensive coordinators in every season type of deal at this point in his career. Like, and his career has kind of been all over the place. Who knows if this one becomes just the bad chemistry match?
It's funny because we look for these clear narratives. Like the Kyle Shanahan narrative is fun, right? It's like you have a history of always elevating quarterbacks. We're going to give you proper credit. Baker's now at this point where him and Dave Canales had a nice little combination. And if Canales continues with the Panthers to develop Bryce Young, it kind of works both ways. Like Baker had a great season, but Baker also had a great season with Liam Cohen. And now Liam Cohen has a chance to rejuvenate Trevor Lawrence. Like maybe they all just worked well together rather than we tend to just either always give credit to the quarterback, always give credit to the coordinator. Feels like the last two, Baker has had a good coordinator and he helped elevate them, right? So can he do that again with a third play caller in 3 years just for the Bucks? But 9 play callers in 8 years in the NFL, whatever it's been for Baker Mayfield, it's a wild run here.
Yeah, he's up to 9 different offense coordinators during his time in the NFL, one of which has happened twice. Like he's had Liam Cohen twice with the Rams and with the Bucks.
And what I'm saying, like when that happened with Jay Cutler, it was like, well, that's Jay Cutler getting everybody fired.
Right.
With Baker, it's like he just got 2 guys hired after years of, not living up to his potential. So fascinating dynamic here with Baker Mayfield and third play caller in 3 years here for the Bucks. So yeah, I think those are, look, they're in a good spot. There's not a ton of massive concerns. I guess the only other one I would throw in there, Chris Godwin's injury, Mike Evans getting older. Like, is there ever a point where they become fragile? They've future-proofed that with Emeka Egbuka. This is why you draft the best player and you don't worry about your current depth chart. Jalen McMillan looked solid last year. But, I mean, if Evans or Godwin have issues at the top of that receiving core, that presents issues for the pass game, obviously.
Yeah, I think that group it potentially has more question marks attached to it than it looks like it does on paper.
All right, man, we did it. Optimism and pessimism. all in 1 week. Appreciate everybody for being here this entire time. As we said, you can subscribe, get us over to the 46,000. I think we got to 46,000 on this show. Nice. Congrats, man. We did it. So thanks to everybody for subscribing and joining us. Like I said earlier, back to 2 shows a week, 9 a.m. on Monday, 10:30 a.m. on Thursday. Let us know, though, if there's a specific time. We pulled the 9 a.m. group on Monday. Is there a specific time that you like? Do we throw the poll in the chat again here today? When do you like when we go live? Do you care? Do you care? Drake's upset we haven't put enough show together. Going down to only like 4.5 hours per week is just not enough in the offseason.
We're really cheapening out. So a couple other little house comes. We are starting to send out merch to bet winners that we had. We've, I think, found all of them at this point. So there's merch on the way out. We also have new merch. We got hats that are in the store right now.
Oh, wow. I hadn't even seen that.
Yeah.
Harrison, send a hat down. I need a hat and a check the mug, please.
Come on, Harrison. And we got the check the mugs that I've been.
So that's what you're using. I'm still old faithful because I haven't had mine sent to me yet. You've got the actual check the mug. Check the mug. Maybe we'll get like all the listeners on like a massive Zoom call. If you have a check the mug, we'll just all hold up our mugs at the same time. Be great.
Oh yeah, that's great content. Good content. All right.
I have good content ideas sometimes.
Yeah.
Zach Robinson's going to be on the show in the coming weeks. Hoping to have some other interviews.
I listened to a podcast who they had a big interview like that, and they screwed up the recording multiple times, in fact. But they have a rule where they can't say who they're getting on right until it actually happens, because the chances are someone's not going to put the card in the recording device, and suddenly the interview disappears in smoke.
And
whereas
you can't
get out here being like, yeah, Zach Robinson will be on the show in a couple of weeks, no problem.
Yeah, I shouldn't have done that. You're right. I mean, you can't get them twice. They're so busy. You can't get them for a second time. That is like my lost Patrick Mahomes interview, Sam.
Exactly.
Somewhere like 4 computers ago, there is a Skype file that I could not find with a pre-draft interview with Patrick Mahomes. And it just never saw the light of day. Never saw it. So it's out there somewhere.
The polling, it's interesting. I think 9 a.m. has been winning every single place we've asked about our time slot, whether it's Twitter, whether it's the Discord, whether it's the chat, whether it's the YouTube posts. So far, I think 9 a.m. has been a fairly resounding victor. So if this one does not immediately swing back to like hard 10:30, we may be 9 a.m. for every show.
We're talking like for the season too?
Yeah, well, yeah, probably.
I mean, it'd still be 7 a.m. on a Monday, probably.
Right.
And then 9 a.m. for the others. We'll see what happens. We might have some other circumstances where we're going to have to go earlier. We'll see what happens this offseason. Things in the works. All right, man. Anything else?
I don't believe so.
Any other ways that you felt old this week?
I didn't feel old. Well, I had to dig a giant trench in my backyard. That made me feel old after the fact when I was in pain.
How sore are you 2 days later?
So not now. It was pretty bad yesterday. The problem with that is digging a trench hits muscles that you don't use doing other things, right? So like no amount of deadlifts or whatever else you're doing in the gym, you're not hitting whatever muscles in your like side back that operate the swinging of the, shovel and stuff. So because whoever built my house in his infinite wisdom decided that the best place for the drainage pipes to terminate is just in the middle of the lawn on the backyard somewhere, not at the drainage pond that's 20 feet further where all the water you would assume is supposed to pool. But the pipe ends midway through my backyard, and had just been like eroding a giant hole in the backyard for the last couple of years. So I was like, I either throw in a bunch of rocks and stones and stuff and just cover in the hole, or I do it properly and extend the pipe down to the pool, the pond where it's supposed to be. So I did that. I dug up a 20-something foot trench, extended the damn pipe all the way down to the thing, and then I had to fill it all back in again. So, yeah, that kind of sucked the other day.
Well, I mean, I'm glad you had the opportunity to do that. That's what May and June are all about. Is those the offseason
digging trenches in your backyard. Yeah,
digging trenches.
The worst part, though, is that there's two of them. I did the one that was clearly uncovered. The other one had uncovered itself, but the patterns of erosion have subsequently filled it back in again. So I don't know quite where that pipe is. So I'm going to have to do it again when that one resurfaces, and I'm going to have to do the other side.
Question about the new studio. We're looking at a June 1st move-in date.
Yeah.
Now, I believe.
So June 1st is now our theoretical day. I don't know if we're getting the desk by that point, but that's when we have access to the place.
I mean, at this point, there's no rush for like a grand opening, but yeah, we'll get in there in June and kind of get it set up, and we'll figure out a fun grand opening as our viewership goes down in the off season. We'll unveil it at some point here. But as for now, working from home. All right, man. Good show. Good discussion. Don't forget to email us too. Check the mic at the33rdteam.com with any of your off-season ideas. Appreciate everybody for tuning in today. We'll see you again on Monday, 9 a.m. with more Check the Mic.